Chapter 732. Did he really leave? Hearing the servant's report, the king of Shu asked again with uncertainty. The servant immediately replied, "It's certain. I saw them leave the city early in the morning." Hearing this, the king of Shu was slightly relieved. Then he was stunned and a trace of anger flashed across his face. The reason for his relief was that the god of plagues had left. The people of the Secret Intelligence Office would naturally leave Shuzhou, and he would regain his absolute control over Shuzhou. As for the reason for his anger, it was because the first prince was relieved because of the departure of an insignificant county marquis. At this moment, the contradiction and entanglement in his heart were really not worth mentioning to others. After changing his expression for a while, he waved his hand to summon a trusted subordinate and gave him a letter, saying, "Send this letter to the Cui family." The treasury had been robbed clean, and there was no way to make money for the time being. If they did not ask for help, the hundreds of people in the mansion of the king of Shu would have no food to eat. The county magistrate of Yong County had learned that County Marquis Li had left Yong County early in the morning. At noon, the people of the Secret Intelligence Office also withdrew from the county government office. "Finally gone?" he murmured with a long sigh. All the officials of the Jing Kingdom were afraid of the Secret Intelligence Office. In particular, he had nightmares for several days after seeing the general's head fall to the ground. During the days when their people stayed in the county government office, he couldn't even sleep well. After sending away the god of plagues, it was time to celebrate today. Looking up, he saw the lieutenant of the river county coming out of the room with a ruddy face. The county magistrate looked at him and said, "Lord Jiang, you caught a cold. You'd better rest more." Jiang Zian waved his hand and said, "Thank you for your concern. Zian is fine now." Seeing the lieutenant of the river county walking out in high spirits, he didn't look as seriously ill as yesterday. The county magistrate touched his bulging belly and couldn't help sighing, "It's good to be young." It was already late June, probably the hottest time of the year. A year ago, because of the unbearable heat in the capital, many people lost their lives. Later on, it became known as the worst summer in decades. This situation in the summer of this year had greatly improved. Firstly, it was raining a lot this year, so most of the weather was cool and not too hot. Secondly, even if it was really unbearably hot, they could spend a few copper coins and hide in the brothel for a whole day. The cool breeze from the ice mirror was so comfortable that it could make people moan. Other than the fact that the weather was cooler than usual for the commoners of the capital, this was a normal summer. The current situation was generally stable. Although there were disagreements with Qi and Zhao, it was limited to some minor skirmishes. Under the deterrence of Tianfa, a larger-scale war had not broken out yet. As for the affairs of the imperial court, it was not something that ordinary people could worry about. They only heard that the current emperor was ill and the imperial court had not been convened for 2 months. Fortunately, there were 2 prime ministers who were conscientious and conscientious. Everything in the country was running in an orderly manner as usual. Of course, there were also some things that were different from the past. From time to time, there would be new plays in the brothel, which were talked about enthusiastically by the common people. Nowadays, the brothel had become a place for ordinary people to spend their leisure time. More and more people had developed the habit of going there to listen to plays and music after a hard day's work to relax. Moreover, there was the policy that was closely related to them. Women were only allowed to marry after the age of 16. This rule had been written into the law. Not only in the capital but also in the neighboring counties, it had begun to be implemented. No one would worry about the waste of food if their daughters were raised at home for 3 years. They were eager to have more daughters because as long as they reached the age of 13, they could be sent to the eldest princess's workshop. A month's salary would be more than enough to feed the whole family. The commoners remembered the princess's kindness, and the officials and nobles did not dare to look down on her. The women's college had been open for more than a few months. Many of the girls and their families who were of the right age were studying there. On the opening day of the women's college, His Majesty and Her Majesty the Empress personally showed up and said some encouraging words, which directly expressed the royal family's attitude. The officials and nobles in the capital also understood that from now on, the girls who graduated from the women's college would be different from those ordinary girls. Compared with the women's college, the Academy of Sciences was a little less famous, because it did not recruit students from the public. Everyone in the Academy of Sciences was personally selected by the dean, Li Xian. This was also the most mysterious place in the 3 academies, which could be seen from the imperial guards who patrolled the area. Of course, the one that shone the brightest was the Mathematics College, which was in the same place as the other 2 colleges. A few months ago, the account investigation made them shine in the capital. For the first time, the officials of the court saw the horror of mathematics. In the following months, they solved countless problems for the court. The ministers of the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Revenue, and the Ministry of War almost fought over some top students in the mathematics college. His Royal Highness Prince Jean, who had always been regarded as a naughty child by the officials, was like a dazzling star. In a very short period of time he rose rapidly. When the dean was not around, he temporarily took over the position of dean and managed the academy in good order. Many times, people would selectively ignore that he was just a child who had just turned 11. The capital seemed to be the capital of the past, and there was no earth-shaking change because of the absence of someone. The playboys were still playboys, but they would no longer be escorted to the palace gate and beaten with a wooden plank. The young princes lived safely in the palace and would not be beaten in front of the civil and military officials. The rumor that the king of Shu was the reincarnation of a real dragon and could lead the Jing kingdom to prosperity and power had long disappeared, and was not as rampant as before. However, no matter whether it was the common people or the nobles, at some point in time, some strange thoughts would arise in the heart. The capital seemed to be too peaceful. Compared to a few months ago, it was so peaceful that people were not used to it. When he stood at the city gate again and saw the two words capital, Li Yi felt an unprecedented sense of familiarity in his heart. County Marquis Li, follow me back to the palace to report. The old Taoist looked at him and said softly, don't let His Majesty wait too long. Report what? We'll talk about it when we have time. Li Yi waved his hand and shook the reins. He turned around and ran along the familiar path. The sloppy old man glanced at the middle-aged Taoist and quickly followed. Taoist priest Yuan this. A general of the intelligence division looked at the middle-aged Taoist with a troubled expression. I've already sent someone to the palace to report to His Majesty. If this, the middle-aged Taoist waved his hand and said, report as it is. In a small courtyard, a thin figure sat by a stone table. She held her chin with both hands and murmured, it's been 4 months and 9 days. Son-in-law and second miss had been gone for 4 months and 9 days. To her, this was a very, very long time, so long that she could not imagine it in the past. Fortunately, she received news some time ago that they would be back soon. However, they did not say when they would be back, so she could not even count. She maintained this posture, her head swaying left and right. At a certain moment, her eyes were suddenly covered by someone from behind. A familiar voice came from behind. Guess who I am? The little servant girl seemed to be thinner than before. Her face was not as round as before. He still liked Xiao Huan, who had an oval face and some baby fat. In the following days he must feed her back. Then he felt a warm feeling on his palm. It was also a little wet. Then he heard the little servant girl's choked voice. Son-in-law, she suddenly turned around and hugged Li Yi tightly. She used all her strength and Li Yi's chest was soon wet. The little servant girl was indeed made of water. Li Yi gently patted her head. When he turned around, a figure walked out of the room. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to freeze for a moment. Li Yi looked at the beautiful woman who was smiling at him and said softly, I'm back. Chapter 733. The closer they got to the capital, the stronger Li Yi's desire to return home became. They changed horses over and over again, almost to the point of traveling day and night. As a result, even the messenger from the secret intelligence office wasn't much faster than them. At this moment, the news of his return to the capital should have just reached the imperial palace. They hadn't seen each other for nearly 5 months, but Rui hadn't changed much. She was just a little pregnant. Li Yi walked over and hugged her gently. Then he bent over and put his ear on her belly. He seemed to be able to feel the rhythm of another breath of life. He had lived 2 lives and experienced many things, but this was the first time he had experienced such a feeling. Rui reached out and touched his face. She said softly, husband. Both of them seemed to have thousands of words in their hearts, but when they spoke, they were only a few simple words or a form of address. However, the emotions they wanted to express were all contained in them. The young servant girl held the second young mistress's hand and looked at the 2 figures at the door. There was an almost dazed smile on her face, and her entire heart was filled with joy. How nice, she thought to herself. Even if what Li Yi wanted to do the most at this moment was to hold Rui's hand, even if he didn't say anything and just looked at her, the news of his return had already spread. When the matriarch walked in while wiping away her tears, he still had to go over and comfort her. It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back. The matriarch of the Li family had been through a lot and quickly calmed down. She patted his hand and said, it's good that you're back. Then, as if she had thought of something, she walked over and held Rui's hand. She said, now you can be at ease. Let's move to the city in the next few months so that we can take care of each other. Seeing that the matriarch was looking at him with a strange expression after wiping away her tears, Li was startled and quickly realized what she meant. Was she guarding against him? No matter how much of a beast he wasn't that much of a beast. Naturally, he couldn't let Rui leave, but it was necessary for them to move to the city. The main reason was that it was convenient. The capital city was not just noisy. She bought a garden with verdant hills and clear waters so that she could rest in peace and nurture the fetus. It was also convenient for the whole family to live there. After sending off the old madam with great difficulty, Xiao Huan had already run over and asked about what had happened in the past few months. Rui sat at the side and listened. Thus, the story unfolded with a heroine with a sword fighting the evil Taoist nun and rescuing the hero. In a small courtyard at the side, the sloppy old man looked at the old man lying on the rocking chair and said respectfully, "Senior, I've brought him back." The antidote. The old man casually tossed a porcelain bottle over, and the sloppy old man revealed an excited expression. He impatiently opened the bottle and swallowed the pill inside. Grind it into powder and add it to the bathtub. Soak it in the bathtub for 2 hours and the poison will be detoxified. The old man's voice sounded slowly. The joy on the sloppy old man's face froze. After being stunned for a moment, his face instantly turned pale. As his expression changed drastically, he slapped his back and spat out the pill. Seeing the stain on the ground, although his stomach churned, he let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. On the rocking chair, the old man stretched and said, "If it's taken orally, it's also possible. The effect will be better." The sloppy old man's expression froze again. After a moment, he lowered his head to look at the ground. When Changda's stiff and expressionless old face came into Li Yi's sight, he knew that he would have to wait until nightfall to tell Xiao Huan and Rui how he and Lu Er Xiaojie were on the street, with 2 watermelon knives in their hands, facing dozens of villains and slaughtered their way in and out. "His Majesty summons you." Although Changda's voice was cold, there was a different expression on his face. "Let's go." The old emperor could not be avoided. Moreover, Li Yi also planned to enter the palace to see his Yongning, Shaning, and the eldest princess. After such a long time, did they miss him? When he walked out of the door, he saw the sloppy old man coming out from another yard and following him. Changda's eyes narrowed and he looked at him a few more times. Li looked at him and asked, "Su, do you have something to do?" The sloppy old man nodded and said, "I'm going out to buy something. Let's go together." Li looked at him and said, "What do you want to buy? I'll bring it for you when I come back." The sloppy old man looked back and said, "No need. Let's go together." Although Lao Chang was there and nothing would go wrong on the way this time and Lao Chang could send him back at the worst, it was not a bad thing to have another guru by his side. If Lao Chang wanted to follow him, then let him follow. Along the way they did not notice any changes in the capital. The sloppy old man got off the car at the gate of the palace. After a few months, Li Yi stepped into the palace gate again. Li Yi looked at Chang in front of him and said, "Chang, we haven't seen each other for a few months. Even if you're not happy to see me again, you don't have to keep a straight face, do you?" Changda looked back at him and said lightly, "We haven't seen each other for a few months. County Marquis Li has made great progress." The foresight of a grandmaster was indeed sharp. To be able to receive such an evaluation from Lao Chang, Li Yi felt that he had the ability to try his luck in the heavenly list. If he were to encounter that white tiger envoy with the surname Fang again, he might not be at a disadvantage. In front of a certain palace, the sound of chattering could be heard. A few figures were chasing each other, laughing and playing. As he passed by, Li Yi saw a small figure running towards him from afar. A smile appeared on his face. He bent down and hugged her, lifting her up high. Then he touched his nose and asked, "Did you miss me?" Although Yongning did not say anything, she hurriedly took out a handful of candies from her bag, peeled them, and put them in Li Yi's mouth. Li Yi could not help but give her a kiss on her tender little face. At the same time, another figure also rushed over. "Sir." The proud Lolita, who was over 12 years old, was like a child who would never grow up. After she flew over, she hung on him like an octopus. This posture was really indecent, so Li could only hug Yongning with one hand and Yongning with the other. Fortunately, he was no longer the weak scholar at the beginning. Otherwise, his 2 arms would not be able to bear such a posture. It was too unscrupulous to hold 2 princesses and wander around the palace like this. After the initial excitement, the proud Lolita finally reacted and jumped down with a red face. However, she still held onto Li Yi's hand and did not let go. Sir's return meant that she could leave the palace to play again. Without Sir, royal sister was very busy, and she had not left the palace for a long time. Every time she came to the palace to see the old emperor, it would be the Hall of Diligent Government, the Hall of Legislative Affairs, or the Imperial Garden. This time it was not any of these three places. When they walked to the door of a palace, Changde reminded him in a low voice, "His Majesty has recently caught a cold. Try not to talk for too long." Li Yi still had a lot of things to do, so he did not want to talk for too long. He nodded and Changde opened the door. Li Yi followed him in. Changde walked to the couch inside and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, County Marquis Li has arrived." After not seeing him for several months, Emperor Jing seemed to have aged a lot. His face was sickly pale, and his body exuded the color of twilight. Li looked up and took a step forward. He suppressed the shock in his heart and bowed, "This subject greets your Majesty." Chapter 734. When he saw Emperor Jing lying on the bed, Li once again realized that this wise monarch seemed to be reaching the end of his life. The morning court session had stopped for almost 2 months. For Emperor Jing, who had never stopped this rule for more than 10 years, he would not do this unless he was at the end of his life. "You're back." Emperor Jing leaned on the bed and looked at something in his hand. When he looked at Li Yi, a smile appeared on his face. Li Yi nodded and said, "You're back?" Emperor Jing got off the bed and looked up at him. Because of the implementation of the debit and credit law, the court has been arguing endlessly for more than a month. Countless officials of the Qi Kingdom are in a mess because of this matter. It can be said that the whole court is in chaos. The first prince of the Qi Kingdom proposed the law of discussing the silver of punishment. Someone pretended to be the imperial censor and the prince's personal guard. They took away 600,000 taels of silver from Bingzhou in the name of discussing the silver of punishment and disappeared. The people of the Qi Kingdom are very resentful about the silver of punishment. Within a month, about 50,000 people in 3 places have revolted out of anger. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and said slowly, "Should I let you stay in the Qi Kingdom for a longer time? It is also a blessing for the Jing Kingdom. If you stay for 8 or 10 years, the Qi Kingdom may perish by itself." Li Yi was stunned and shook his head. "What are you talking about, Your Majesty? I don't understand." He really didn't know about the uprising. Even if there was an uprising, it had nothing to do with him. He couldn't take the blame for everything. The people of the Qi Kingdom revolted because of such a trivial matter. Their hearts were really fragile. "It's good that you are safe." Emperor Jing waved his hand and didn't care. He said, "For the next few days you should rest at home. Put other things aside for the time being." The other things he mentioned were naturally the affairs of the academy. In fact, there was also the Academy of Sciences. A few months was enough for him to understand that between the 2 academies, perhaps the latter was more important. No matter which one it was, Li Yi would be able to play an important role. Even if the old emperor didn't mention it, Li Yi would have mentioned it anyway. Rui was pregnant, and he had been away from home for nearly 5 months. He was really not a responsible husband. In the future he naturally had to make up for it. How could he have the mood to care about other trivial things? No matter what, he had to take 2 years of paternity leave first. As for the academy, Li Han, that little fellow, was managing it pretty well. It was good enough for him to be the Grand Dean. Opportunities had to be left to these young people. While Li Yi was thinking about these things, Jingdi's gaze was always on him. The fact that Li Yi was abducted was indeed far beyond his expectations. However, even though he was abducted, he was still able to stir up such a great storm in the Qi Kingdom, stirring up the imperial court, and forcing the people of several lands in the Qi Kingdom to rebel. This indirectly eased the friction between the 2 kingdoms. Because they had to divide their energy to deal with the internal strife in the Qi Kingdom, it wasn't that he didn't think about the matter of discussing the silver of guilt. He weighed the pros and cons in his heart, but in the end, it was rejected by Li Yi. At that time in his heart, there was a slight doubt about the seriousness of this matter. However, after learning the news from the Qi Kingdom, the trace of doubt in his heart disappeared completely. Although Li Yi usually didn't reveal his talents, his vision and judgment were rarely wrong. The only thing that had never changed was his lazy personality, which made people feel helpless from the beginning. A strange sound came from the hall, interrupting Jingdi's thoughts. He looked at Li Yi again. Li Yi touched his belly awkwardly and said, "I came out in a hurry just now, so I didn't eat much today. Ask the catering company to prepare something and send it over." Jingdi looked at Changde and ordered, "It just so happens that I am a little hungry." Li Yi didn't have time to refuse. In fact, what he meant was, "Are you done? If you haven't finished, hurry up and say it. If you are done, I will go back to eat." There are still a lot of things waiting to be done, however, he couldn't say this. If he angered the old emperor to death, he couldn't beat Chang. The catering company moved very quickly. It was very likely that it had been prepared a long time ago. Jing Di usually ate light food, and this time was naturally no exception. Li Yi wasn't proud of being able to eat with the emperor often. When Mississippi Lu was recuperating, they had been eating light food. It wasn't easy for them to come back, so they had to eat something, right? Moreover, this wasn't the only reason. There was another reason that he couldn't point out. The old emperor ate with relish alone, and Changda's old face relaxed a little as he looked at him. Li Yi raised his head to look at Changda. He thought of what he had just said and then looked at the old emperor. He couldn't help but have a strange feeling in his heart. He had to accompany him to eat for the emperor to have an appetite. Was this an abnormal hobby that the old emperor had developed in Ning Wangfu? As he was thinking, Jing Di raised his head to look at him and asked, "Why aren't you eating? Is the food not to your taste?" Li Yi wanted to say something but stopped. He finally asked, "Has your majesty caught a cold these past 2 days? It's no longer a problem." Jing Di coughed lightly and said, "If it is not to your taste, Zhen will order the catering company to make something else." Li Yi had a difficult expression on his face. "Your majesty knows that this official's wife is pregnant and her body is weak. If this official also catches a cold..." Jing Di was very smart. Before Li Yi finished speaking, he understood what he meant. Then the expression on his face became a little dazed. Was he disdaining him? Disdaining the monarch of a country? Disdaining this matter that was regarded as a special honor by countless people? Even the 2 prime ministers in the court did not have the special honor of eating with him. Even if the ministers of the 6 departments received such an honor, they would most likely bathe and fast for 3 days, be deeply grateful, and kneel down to thank the emperor for his grace. But now, he was actually disdained by someone? Jing Di raised his head and saw his innocent face. His face darkened and he waved his hand and said, "Get out of here immediately." "Get out of here, yes. This official takes his leave." Seeing Li Yi slip out like a rabbit, Changda looked at Jing Di and immediately said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This old servant will catch the boy and bring him back." Jing Di waved his hand and a smile appeared on his face again. He said, "Changda, what do you think this boy will be like when he becomes a father?" Changda was stunned, and the scene of him holding the 2 princesses appeared in his mind. He shook his head and did not answer, but he still felt that the child of County Marquis Li should be very happy. After walking out of a certain palace, Li Yi's face showed a relaxed expression again. His worry was not unreasonable. If he was really infected by the old emperor, where could he go to cry? The world was big and Rui was the most important. Everything else had to stand aside. But not long after, his relaxed expression gradually disappeared, and a trace of worry appeared between his eyebrows. He did not know how long the old emperor's body could last. According to the current situation, it was really not optimistic. He had no energy to manage too many state affairs. After completely delegating power, what would the situation in the court be like? "I'm afraid I have to make plans early." When passing by a certain place in the palace, Li Yi habitually stopped. You should be faster. Can you afford to make a mistake? And you, what are you looking at? You have nothing to do, right? If you have nothing to do, go and wash the dishes over there. Hurry up, do you not have ears?" The manager of the catering hall was giving a lecture, and a group of people stood in a row in front of him. He enjoyed this feeling very much. In this small place he was the absolute master. Since a certain day a few months ago, this feeling had become more and more intense. Every time he saw these people standing in front of him with their heads bowed and trembling, he would have an inexplicable sense of satisfaction in his heart. This sense of satisfaction was destroyed when several people in front of him raised their heads and looked behind him. "What are you looking at?" His face darkened. When he was about to give a lecture, he heard footsteps behind him. The manager looked back and saw a familiar figure coming in from outside. His whole body trembled, and something that he had built up with great difficulty in his heart was shattered. "Use the kitchen." After several months, the demonic voice once again rang in his ears. In the morning dew hall. The woman turned and moved and the sword chi whistled. With the eyesight of ordinary people, they could not even follow her movements. The white-haired old woman stood in the corridor, looked at the figure in front of her, and sighed slowly. A maid came over with a food box in her hand and said, "Nanny Rong, the catering hall sent food here." "Got it? You can leave now." The old woman took the food box, put it on the stone table beside her, and took out the food inside. She raised her head and said, "Princess, eat something first." Emingzi put away her sword, walked over and said, "Leave it first. I don't have much appetite now. When she walked into the hall, a breeze blew, bringing some of the fragrance of the food. Emingzu stopped, turned her head and walked straight to the stone table. Nanny Rong watched her pick up the golden fried rice with eggs, which was the princess's favorite food. However, in the past few months she had never eaten the fried rice with eggs sent by the catering hall. Emingzu picked up the spoon and tasted a little bit. Suddenly, there was a glimmer of light in her beautiful eyes. Then she put down the spoon, raised one hand and grabbed the arm that attacked her from behind. At the same time she put down the plate of fried rice with eggs and leaned forward. Bang! Li Yi was pressed against the pillar outside the hall by her. The face that he had not seen for a long time but was familiar to him was so close that he could even see the slight tremble of her eyelashes. The Princess Royal Highness was still as domineering as before. She put one arm on his chest, and the two of them could even feel each other's breath. In this situation, Li Yi did not know if he should close his eyes to cooperate. Perhaps his first kiss today would be taken away by her just like that. Chapter 735. Li Yi's confidence suffered a severe blow when his sneak attack failed and he was knocked out instead. In these 5 months in terms of training he did not slack off at all. He slept very well every day. Even if he did not become a grandmaster expert like Ru Yi, unrivaled in the pugilistic world, he could at least be called a hero, right? But even if it was a sneak attack, Princess Royal could force him to the wall while eating, which made him doubt his strength. You've made a lot of progress. Emingzu said this while eating egg fried rice, which was a blatant irony. Thinking that she was on par with second Miss Lu, she felt a little better in her heart. Emingzu threw a jar of wine over. Li Yi caught it and threw it back. You're pregnant so you can't drink. Emingzu nodded, patted the lid and drank by herself. When the wine from the palace was sent here, it was served in exquisite utensils. Such a bold and unrestrained scene could only be seen in the morning dew hall. Emingzu asked him about what had happened in the past few months while eating. Li Yi briefly mentioned it and learned something about the women's college and the workshop. He looked at the sky and said, "It's getting late. I'll go back first. See you in a few days." It was a spur-of-the-moment idea just now. He felt that since he had come to the palace, it would be unreasonable if he didn't come to see her. He spent some time at the dining party so he had to hurry back or he would miss the meal. Emingzu continued to eat egg fried rice, waved her hand casually and didn't look up. Her action seemed to be careless, but half an hour later when there was a sword whistling in the back hall, Nanny Rong still found that the sword in her hand was no longer as heavy as before, and it was a little more flexible and light. After having a clear understanding of his own strength, Li Yi planned to let Chang send him back. Not to mention Taoist none, even if there was a master as powerful as Princess Royal, the guards on the surface and in the dark and himself, he was afraid that he would not be able to defeat her. However, when he walked out of the palace gate, Li Yi couldn't help but be startled. The sloppy old man squatted under a big tree not far away, directly facing the palace gate. There were already a lot of candy wrappers on the ground. Li Yi walked over, looked at him and asked in surprise, "Didn't Sue have something to buy? Why are you still here?" The sloppy old man straightened up and said, "I've already bought it. Do you want to go back? It's on the way." If the sloppy old man was passing by, then Chang wouldn't have anything to do with it. If there were really two grandmasters who had come together to kidnap him, Li Yi would accept it. "Su Tian." Chang stood at the gate of the palace and watched the carriage leave. He thought of what Taoist Yuan had said before and after spitting out the name, his eyes narrowed. On a certain street in Jingdo, the sloppy old man pointed forward and said, "It seems like this is not the way to go back. That road is blocked. It's faster to go here. Listen to me, you're right." When the carriage reached a certain place, Li Yi waved his hand and jumped out of the carriage. He said, "Sue, wait here for a moment. I'll be right back." As he said this, he had already walked into the alley. Willow Alley was still Willow Alley. People came and went in the brothel next to the alley, but there were not many customers in the tea house in the alley. This was because the cost of the tea house was not low. Unknowingly, most people were blocked outside. At this moment, at a seat near the window of the tea house, a few young people looked out and saw a figure walking into the courtyard inside. At that moment, one of them couldn't help but chuckle. "Ha, another one who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth." After everyone looked over, there were a few whispers among themselves. "I'm afraid he hasn't recognized himself yet. If it was so easy to see the goddess of Luo Shui, why would we be sitting here drinking tea? Wait until he gets the cold shoulder a few times and comes to his senses. I'm afraid there will be another person here drinking tea." The few of them didn't hide the sarcasm and laughter on their faces. They, who had gotten the cold shoulder countless times, could already imagine the look on the servant girl's face when she came out. Li didn't notice the few people in the tea house watching him make a fool of himself. After standing outside for a long time, he raised his hand and knocked on the door. The sound of footsteps came from inside, but the door didn't open. Then there was a clear and angry voice. "Mrs. Not here. Don't come again." Li was startled. When did Xiao Chui, the servant girl, become so fierce? He knocked on the door again. The footsteps had already gone far away, but they soon came closer. The courtyard door opened with a creak and Xiao Chui poked her head out. She said with a bit of anger, "How many times have I told you don't come here, miss?" She originally had a straight face as if she was lecturing them. Halfway through her sentence, her eyes suddenly widened and her voice became softer. Then she rubbed her eyes in disbelief. After taking a closer look, she still didn't believe it, so she prepared to rub her eyes again. Li pulled her face. It was very elastic and full of collagen. After not seeing her for a few months, she was slightly fatter than before. It seemed that she had been eating well these days. He walked in by himself and asked, "Is Ruoqing and your miss here?" In the tea house opposite, the few young people who saw this scene all widened their eyes at the same time. He just pinched the servant girl's face? He just walked in like that? What right does he have? Voices of surprise and disbelief rang out. The sarcasm in the few people's hearts immediately turned into jealousy and anger. They had also visited countless times. Not only did they not see the Luo Shui goddess, they didn't even step into the courtyard. What right did this newcomer have to go in and pinch the servant girl's face? Immediately, one of them stood up and angrily asked the few people outside the tea house, "Why didn't you stop him?" Although he was still a little afraid of those people, the anger in his heart took the upper hand at this moment. At the entrance of the tea house, a man who sat there every day drinking tea asked in surprise, "Did I see wrongly?" One of his companions said, "I saw it too. It should be right." As the two of them suppressed the shock in their hearts, they saw the young man walking over and questioning them loudly. He raised his head and glanced at him. "Scram. If you don't scram, I'll break your legs." It was obvious that he had suffered a lot from these people. The young man retracted his head and left dejectedly. Xiao Chui came back to her senses. After closing the door, she immediately ran over and exclaimed in surprise, "Li, you're back." Li nodded and asked, "Where are Miss Ruoqing and your miss?" "Sister Ruoqing and miss left early in the morning. I don't know when they will be back." Xiao Chui looked at him and added, "They really aren't here this time. Li, sit here for a while. I'll go pour you some tea." Seeing Xiao Chui run off quickly, Li did not sit down at the stone table. Instead he walked towards the back. The door to the art room was unlatched. He pushed the door open and walked in. The furnishings inside were not too different from what he remembered. There were a few unfinished sketches of undergarments on the table. There were also many sketches hanging in the room. It was slightly messy. When he turned around to leave, he turned his head again and picked up a drawing on the table. Underneath it was also an unfinished drawing. It was a drawing of a young man bent over a table, painting. Li stared at it for a long time before putting it back in its original position. Xiao Chui walked in with a cup of tea and said, "Miss and Sister Ruoqing might have gone to a brothel. I don't know where they went and when they will be back." "It's fine." Li took the teacup and walked out of the art room. After taking a sip, he placed it on the stone table in the courtyard. His gaze looked around. Not long after, he turned back and smiled at Xiao Chui, saying, "When they come back, remember to tell me. I'll be leaving first." Li walked out of the door, passed through Willow Lane and got on the carriage. The sloppy old man glanced at him and said, "I just went over to take a look. That road is not blocked." Li put down the curtain and said, "It's been blocked." Chapter 736. In the small courtyard, Xiao Huan bent over, put her ear on Rui's slightly bulging abdomen. After a while she raised her head, puzzled. "Why are you not moving? It's only been a few months, how can it be so easy to hear?" Li pinched her face. By right there should be movement at this time, but maybe because both Rui and he liked quiet, the little fellow did not move much. He moved his head closer. "Let me hear." That Sundra Loli stood beside Li with her hands behind her back. She leaned forward and looked around curiously, blinking her eyes. Further away, Yongning was sitting on the swing while Duanwu was pushing her gently from behind. Rui looked at them with a smile on her face. This small courtyard, which had been quiet for a long time, finally became lively again. The news of Li Yi's return was not actually known to many people. He only went to the palace once. After returning home, he did not go out. Now it was already the third day. Mainly because it was not easy to come back, he wanted to have a few days of peace, spend more time with Rui. Once the news spread, the family would not be peaceful. Although the experience of these nearly 5 months, although it was more daunting than dangerous, turning misfortunes into blessings and even had some small gains, but after really experiencing it, only then did he know where the dangers lay, and also made him cherish what he had now. The present life was quiet and tranquil, but it was not easy to come by. Peace was indeed not easy to come by, although the news of his return was not widely spread, but there would always be some people who knew through various channels. Li Xian barged in with a black face, looked at him, said angrily, "You have been back for 3 days and you did not tell me. If not for Emming's mentioning it today, I still do not know about it." It was Li Yi's decision not to tell him for the time being. This fellow never thought of him when there were good things, but he could not forget troublesome things. If he wanted to live a leisurely life, he must avoid him. His dark face was obviously just an act. Li Xian had always been heartless, and his eyes were only filled with those strange things. The next second an unconcealable joy appeared on his face and he said, "Let's go out and have a drink to celebrate. Let's go to the Jade Courtyard, the old place." Fang, on the other hand, nodded his head fiercely, seemingly agreeing with this suggestion. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I won't be going to the Jade Field Courtyard. Since you're already here, stay for a meal." Li Xian asked, "Do you cook?" Li Yi nodded. In the days to come, Rui's 3 meals a day, he didn't plan on borrowing other people's hands. Li Xian nodded and said, "Then I won't be polite this time." Li Yi thought, "When have you ever been polite?" But he saw Li Xian slightly turn sideways, pointed to a person behind him and said, "Let me introduce, this is Xin Shu. Don't be fooled by his effeminate appearance, he is very capable. You'll know when you come to the Academy of Science in the future." County Marquis Li. The young man behind Li Xian stepped forward and cupped his hands in salute. Li Yi casually returned the salute. "Brother Xin, you're welcome." Li Yi rarely saw Li Xian being so enthusiastic to someone. It seemed that this Xin Shu should have some ability, so he couldn't help but look at him a few more times. Her skin was indeed soft and tender, and she looked effeminate. He only took a few more glances before shifting his gaze away. "How is the princess's health?" Li Xian waved his hand and said, "She lives in the palace and it's very good. There are several imperial doctors around her. Even if I want to see her, I have to get the concubine's permission." As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and looked at Li Yi with a different gaze. "Actually, I have an idea." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If it's about the Academy of Science, don't tell me first. We won't talk about these things for now." "No." Li Xian shook his head quickly and said, "Qin Er was pregnant at about the same time as your wife, so she should be giving birth at about the same time. Based on the relationship between our 2 families, why don't we just marry each other?" Before Li Yi agreed, he immediately said, "If it's a boy or a girl, let them be sworn brothers and support each other in the future. If it's a boy and a girl, let's marry each other. What do you think?" No. Li Yi was resolute. Of course he wouldn't agree on this matter. It would be fine if his family gave birth to a son. Although Li Xian was unreliable, he did have the looks of a decent man. His wife's beauty was also 1 in 1,000. Based on their genes, the daughter they gave birth to would not be too bad. It would be perfect for his son. But if it was the other way around and the boy from Li Xian's family wanted to harm his daughter, in his dreams, Li Xian's face was full of surprise. "What? Don't worry about the children. An arranged marriage is not a good idea." Li Yi glanced at him and said, "For the sake of a marriage, I wonder who was the one who drank himself into a stupor in Qing and Fu." Xin Shu, who was at the side, looked at Li Xian with some surprise. It seemed that he had not expected him to have such a past. An awkward expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He hurriedly said, "Aren't we doing quite well now?" Although he said this, there was not much confidence in his voice. It was clear that those days in the past were still fresh in his mind. Li Yi stood up, dusted his hands and walked towards the kitchen. What Li Xian had said just now had its merits. It was fine to become sworn brothers, but as for the good of the Qin Jin, that would depend on fate. In his previous life he did not have a deep understanding of how scary an arranged marriage was. But now he hated it with all his heart. For Li Xian and the heir's consort to have a happy ending, there were some coincidental factors involved. However, what happened to him involved the grudges between 2 generations. Even now he still couldn't let go of it. That matter had become a dead knot. Li Xian freeloaded this meal without any pressure. During the meal he talked about some of the problems that the Academy of Sciences was currently facing. Li Yi only gave him pointers where necessary. For Li Xian, the process of exploration and discovery was what gave him a sense of satisfaction. Don't tell anyone that I'm back for the time being. Before Li Xian left, Li Yi reminded him again. Although there were still many things to do, Li Yi did not want to be disturbed by other things at the moment. Li Xian waved his hand to indicate that he understood. Walking out of the courtyard, he habitually put his arm around Xin Shu's shoulder and said with a smile, "This guy is like this. When you go back, remember not to tell anyone." Xin Shu frowned. He was still not used to his warmth. He discreetly removed his arm and said in a low voice, "Got it?" Li Xian touched his nose and said, "I say, can you be more like a man? You are so effeminate. Which girl will be willing to marry you in the future? None of your business." Xin Shu's voice finally rose a pitch. In the small courtyard, Li Yi could no longer hear these voices outside. He stood behind Rui and gently massaged her shoulders. Rui was still a little unaccustomed to this, but it was not appropriate for her to say it. She changed the topic and said, "What Prince Li Xian said just now, are you really not going to consider it?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Marriage is not a child's play. How can we be so hasty and set a marriage for them so casually? I'm afraid that they will blame us." After a moment of silence, Rui said in a low voice, "Then, what about us?" Li Yi stopped what he was doing. He thought for a moment and said, "Don't forget, you were the one who snatched me away. You weren't careless at all." Chapter 737. When a woman was pregnant, her emotions would inevitably become more sensitive. Li Yi did not feel any obvious difference from Rui, but that did not mean that he could be as carefree as usual. Usually, when it came to dealing with small emotions, he would still take it seriously. The old emperor had tacitly approved of his paternity leave and did not send any more workers over. Even the academy did not urge him. For Li Yi, not being able to see Chang's face was something to be happy about. Mississippi Lu had always been restless, but these days she had a rare moment of peace. Perhaps it was because she was stimulated by Taoist nun. She practiced martial arts every day and would drag him to practice from time to time. She said that she wanted to increase her combat experience. The increase in combat experience was not very obvious, but the pain in his butt became more obvious every time. Li Yi felt that she was taking revenge. Apart from being a human sandbag, Li Yi was not busy these days. Most of the time he cooked, chatted with her, and read some books on prenatal and postnatal care. As for the other things, he left them to Fong to handle. One of them was to buy a house in the city. It was surrounded by beautiful mountains and rivers and was good for the physical and mental health. Although this place was not far from the capital, it was still outside the city. There were no good places to go around. It was inevitable that he would feel depressed if he stayed at home all the time. Li Yi planned to move there as soon as possible. At that time, it would be more convenient for him to do everything. His favorite place should be Hibiscus Garden, Xujiang Garden, and a few other places with good feng shui. The environment was good and most importantly there were no people. However, this was not a good request. A county marquis occupied the royal garden. It would be strange if the civil and military officials did not go crazy. These days he often saw the sloppy old man at home. Previously, he thought that the sloppy old man had been entrusted by his second granduncle to travel thousands of miles to the Qi kingdom. Now it seemed that this was not the case. He saw through it but did not say it. With a grandmaster by his side, the safety factor immediately increased. He originally thought that he could use a pile of white rabbit creamy candies to deal with him. Now he even saved these things. Although there was nothing to do at home, the things that needed to be done were still piling up. For example, the Wang clan's glass business, the eldest princess's ready-made clothing, embroidery, military rations, and even the perfume, soap, and Rui nectar that he didn't need to manage. He had too many businesses under his control. Although he didn't have to do everything himself, it was still necessary for him to understand them. Although these things had to be done sooner or later, they weren't that urgent, so Li naturally pushed them off. There were things that needed to be done, and there were naturally people that needed to be seen. As the carriage passed through the capital once again, the sloppy old man finally understood when he saw the complicated expression that flashed across Li Yi's face. However, it was not the road that was blocked. Perhaps it was something else. "Zimo, do you still remember when you were a child you loved to eat the Su Jiji's candied plums? At that time, your mother was afraid that you would break your teeth and wouldn't let you eat it, so you secretly saved up money to sneak out. You were almost caught by a trafficker, and the whole family was scared out of their wits." In a small courtyard deep in Willow Lane, a middle-aged man in a blue robe stood there with a smile on his face. He said, A few days ago I had been looking for that shop. I ran all over the capital but couldn't find it. Only yesterday did I find out that it was the Su Ggg, but it later changed its name. He placed a paper bag on the stone table, opened it and said, "It's on Xingping Street. It's now called Fuji. When I came just now I bought some along the way. Try it and see if it tastes the same as before." Zheng Zumo looked at the paper bag on the table and the candied fruits inside. A trace of confusion appeared on her face, mixed with some memories from so long ago that she couldn't remember them at all. How long ago was that? 11 years, 12 years, or 13 years? At that time her mother was very strict with her. Being able to eat Suji's candied plums was probably the happiest thing in her life. However, this small wish was actually not very likely to come true. At that time, although her father's official position was not high, he was very strict. Even though the candied plums from the Suji worldwide commerce were not worth much, if she really wanted to eat them to her heart's content, second uncle would secretly buy them for her, and she would eat them under the blanket at night. At that time, she and her second uncle were not like this. However, things in this world could never return to yesterday, let alone 13 years ago. Seeing that she was unmoved, the middle-aged man's eyes dimmed slightly, but he concealed it well and said, "Tomorrow is the Zheng family's banquet. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow?" Zheng Shichen was taken aback. He shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter. There will be more opportunities in the future." He looked at the sky and said, "Second uncle still has work to do, so I'll leave first. I'll come see you tomorrow." Only when the middle-aged man turned to leave did Zheng Zumo look up. A hint of pain flashed through the depths of her eyes. "It's all in the past." Wan Ruoqing walked out of the house and looked at her with some heartache. She placed her hand on her shoulder and said softly. Some long-sealed memories emerged from her mind. Zheng Zumo bit her lip and her face was a little pale. She held Wan Ruoqing's hand tightly and nodded. "It's all in the past." Li Yi walked to the door of the small courtyard. He estimated that Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo should not be there at this time. After hesitating for a moment, he still planned to knock on the door. The courtyard door opened from the inside, and a middle-aged man in a blue robe walked out from inside. Li Yi's movement paused slightly. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Zheng Shichen. Why was he here? When Zheng Shichen walked out of the courtyard, he probably thought that the young man outside the courtyard door was some kind of crazy bees and butterflies. These kinds of people had appeared frequently recently, and he had encountered them countless times. His gaze did not even linger on the man's face, and he simply brushed past him. However, after taking 2 steps, he seemed to think of something and turned back abruptly. At this time the young man had already walked into the courtyard, and the courtyard door was closed. Zheng Shichen froze in place, and then a trace of surprise appeared on his face. Crazy bees and butterflies? If it was just crazy bees and butterflies, it was impossible to enter this courtyard. That person just now, was it him? Li Yi walked into the courtyard, closed the door and walked inside. When he was still thinking about why he would meet the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue here. If he remembered correctly, the other seemed to belong to the Cui family, and was a firm supporter of the King of Shu. Although there was no direct confrontation with him in the court, this person's status in the King of Shu's faction was not low, and he still had this impression. What puzzled him was that without the permission of the two, it was impossible for outsiders to enter this courtyard, and Zheng Shichen was alone. For the time being he could not figure out these things. Thinking that Xiao Cui should know something, Li Yi passed through the moon door and saw a figure sitting at the stone table in front of him. He said, "Xiao Zumo?" Xiao Cui said these 2 words halfway before realizing that the person sitting there was Miss Zheng. Her brain was a bit short-circuited, and she suddenly changed her words, sounding like, "Xiao Zumo." Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing raised their heads at the same time, and the atmosphere in the courtyard began to become a bit awkward. After Li Yi's footsteps stopped, he showed a smile that he thought was brilliant, and waved his hand saying, "You are all here, what a coincidence." Chapter 738. When they looked up, the 2 women were startled for a moment. Then joy quickly appeared on their faces. Xiao Cui had said that he had returned to the capital, but they had missed him a few days ago. In fact, they had not gone out these days. The joy on Zheng Zumo's face was quickly concealed. Wan Ruoqing quickly took a few steps forward and then paused. Although she was excited, her voice turned into calmness. Xiao Cui said before that she thought you would come over in a few days. Li Yi nodded. Without any courtesy or awkwardness, he nodded and said, "I've been delayed by some matters these few days." Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked with a smile, "How is Madame Li?" Neither of them noticed that Zheng Zumo's body trembled slightly when she heard this. She looked at Li Yi and then quickly looked away. She is fine. Li Yi looked back and asked, was the one who went out just now Assistant Minister Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue? The security around Willow Alley was not low. However, all of this was on the premise that they did not disturb their daily lives. Those ignorant playboys or those with ulterior motives could not even get close to the gate. However, if they had their permission, no one would stop them. Wan Ruoqing nodded and then turned to look at Zheng Zumo. Zheng Zumo had already stood up and walked over. Looking at Li Yi, she said softly, I am sorry. Li Yi was startled, not knowing why she would suddenly say this. I was actually at home that day. Zheng Zumo lowered her head. If it wasn't for me, this would not have happened. This matter had actually been buried in her heart for a long time. The two emotions of self-blame and guilt intertwined in her heart every day. It was only at this moment, when she saw that he was safe and sound with her own eyes, that her heart could finally be at ease. Li Yi finally remembered that he had been to Willow Lane that day. At that time, Xiao Cui said that Zheng Zumo was not there. When he went back, he met the Taoist nun. At this moment, he smiled and waved his hand as if he didn't care about this matter at all. He said, this has nothing to do with you. She originally planned it. If it wasn't that day, it could have been the second day or the third day. Instead of asking why Zheng Zumo asked Xiao Cui to lie that day, Li Yi looked at her and asked uncertainly, that Assistant Minister Zheng? Zheng Zumo whispered, it's my second uncle. Suddenly hearing this news, Li Yi was startled. He looked at her and asked, this? What is going on? He could feel Zheng Zumo's emotions at this moment. After saying this, he immediately changed his words. If it's not convenient, it's not inconvenient. Zheng Zumo shook her head. It's all in the past. She walked towards the door. I'm about to go to the shop. Let's talk on the way. Li Yi really didn't expect that she actually had such a story. More than a decade ago, the Zheng family was not very prominent, but in the capital city, it was also regarded as a rich family. Of course, the Zheng family at that time was not the Zheng family now. Zheng Zumo's father seemed to be a small official in the Ministry of Revenue. Later, because of a mistake in an important matter, he was involved in the struggle in the court and was pushed to the teeth of the storm. As a result, the direct line of the Zheng family suffered a heavy blow. The men were punished, beheaded or exiled, and the women were sent to the musical house, while the others were safe. Later, the second branch of the Zheng family got in touch with the Cui family, so the Zheng family recovered. Zheng Shichen was even promoted to the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. In fact, today's Zheng family was more prominent than 10 years ago. As a direct line of the Zheng family, Zheng Zumo was implicated at a very young age. After several twists and turns, she moved to the musical house, the Jade Courtyard, and then redeemed herself and came to the capital city. She had never mentioned these things before, so it was the first time for Li Yi to know. Li Yi looked at her and asked, are there any family members in the musical house now? Zheng Zumo shook her head and said, my mother had committed suicide before they came to confiscate our house. In fact, I am the only one. Li Yi had heard about what happened in the musical house and the brothel, and then associated it with her decisive and almost stubborn character. He could roughly imagine how she grew up step by step from the daughter of an official to become what she was now. How many hardships and suffering she had suffered. Even if he had lived two lives, he could not understand it at all. Thinking of these things, he inexplicably felt a little sad in his heart. Zheng Zumo inadvertently raised her head and happened to catch a certain expression on his face. Li Yi's heart sank. He was worried that with her character she might regard this as pity, so he hurriedly explained, don't. Seeing his nervous look, Zheng Zumo smiled, and a trace of warmth surged in her heart. She asked, what about you? Where have you been these months? Ruoqing, who had not spoken all the way, also turned to look at him. All the way to the west, first to Shuzhou and then stayed in the Qi kingdom for 2 months. Li Yi gave a brief account of his journey over the past few months. As for the dangerous parts, he naturally skipped over them in a single sentence. Even so, the two women heard something different from his words. They clenched their fists in their sleeves, but did not show the slightest emotion on their faces. A few steps behind him, the shock on the face of the sloppy old man had never faded. At this moment he finally understood why that shortcut was always blocked. Li Yi did not say much on this topic. When passing by a clothing store, he cleverly changed the topic. In terms of clothing, the capital city had undoubtedly set the trend for the Jing kingdom and even the surrounding countries. The dazzling array of clothing had caused the eyes of the women to be dazzled. As for undergarments, most of the women had already accepted them. Although there were still some conservative women who still resisted, they could no longer affect the vigorous reform of undergarments. The brothel had not changed much. In fact, the operating model had matured, and the number of brothels in the capital had long reached saturation. In these months, in addition to expanding to more distant states and counties, they also took root in their respective places, and gradually became a daily thing for the people. Every midnight, Wan Ruoqing would vaguely remember that more than a year ago, when the brothel was about to close and everyone was worried about their livelihood, he broke into everyone's sight with a disdainful attitude. At first, he just wanted to live and survive in such a world. Later, he didn't have to worry about living, and he wanted to let the performers of Qin and Mansion live a better life. Later, it became what it was today. The magnificent picture that he had imagined at the beginning would probably be realized in the near future. Li estimated the time and said, "It's getting late. Let's find a place to eat first." "Why don't we go back and cook?" Wan Ruoqing suggested. Li pointed to the restaurant in front and said, "In a while we'll go to the shops and brothel in front to take a look. Let's make do here first." Wan Ruoqing nodded, and Zheng Zimo naturally had no objections. Ever since all kinds of new plays began to rise in the capital, whether it was the common people or the powerful officials, many people had developed the habit of listening to plays. Many restaurants in the capital had also undergone some changes. After entering the restaurant, the first thing they faced was a stage that was half the height of a person. On the stage, there were performers specially hired by the restaurant to perform for the guests to enjoy. In the lobby on the first floor, facing the stage, the tables were arranged in the shape of stars. The position on the second floor was better, and one could see the whole scene from a high place. Of course, the corresponding price was more expensive. When Li Yi and the two women walked into the restaurant, it should be mealtime, but there weren't many customers eating. From the outside, this should be a high-end restaurant. Ordinary people probably couldn't afford it, so it was normal for such a situation to occur. Soon, a waiter came to greet them. At this time, somewhere on the second floor, wine glasses were clinked, but they were not taken back. Seeing this, someone asked curiously, "Young Master Qin, what's wrong?" Chapter 739. The table of banquets upstairs had always affected the heart of this restaurant's shopkeeper. To be able to open a restaurant here with a high standard meant that there must be some sort of backer behind them. At the very least, that backer could help them avoid most of the troubles they encountered on a daily basis. However, in front of certain people, there would come a time when these people would not be enough. The table upstairs belonged to this category. These rich young masters of the capital might not have much ability themselves, but their family backgrounds were often dukes or third-rank officials of the imperial court. They could not be provoked. Fortunately, although there were a few tables upstairs, they were quite far away from each other, so they were safe. The shopkeeper withdrew his gaze from them and looked at a group of people walking through the door. One of them was a young man who looked very unfamiliar, but he was quite handsome. Beside him were two women who were extremely outstanding in appearance. However, the sloppy-looking old man who was following behind the three of them ruined the atmosphere, causing the four of them to look a little strange. He called for a waiter to go over and wait for him. He no longer paid attention to them and focused on moving the abacus in his hand. Speaking of which, this thing made by the academy was really useful. Using this thing called abacus to calculate accounts was much faster and more convenient than before. Young Master Qin, what's wrong?" At a table on the second floor, the young man carefully asked again. "Nothing." Qin Yu finally withdrew his hand and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. His expression was calm as if nothing had happened. The young man turned his head and looked down. His gaze swept past a certain place and he was slightly startled. Then, he withdrew his gaze and thought of a certain rumor about this young Duke Qin. His heart immediately understood. He looked down again and his heart suddenly became lively. "Young Master Qin, I'll take my leave for a moment." After another round of toasting, the young man stood up and said apologetically. Then he turned and walked down the stairs. Qin Yu's gaze moved slightly. He glanced down but did not stop him. Wei Liangjun was the son of a newly appointed assistant minister in the Ministry of Rights. Although he was not directly under the Qin family, he had a deep relationship with the Qin family. Assistant Minister Wei had just been appointed, but in a short period of time, he had made many achievements. His reputation in the court was quite good, and he was a figure that the Qin family was pushing forward. Across from Qin Yu, Zheng Zijian glanced downwards. His face darkened and his facial expression twitched. That man and woman had left an indelible impression in his heart. However, hatred was just hatred. It didn't stop him from thinking that Wei Liangjun, who thought he was smart, was a complete idiot. In the past 5 months, a storm had been brewing in the capital. Some officials had been banished from the capital, but naturally, there were also some officials who had emerged and entered the center of power. The momentary glory made some idiots feel that they could do whatever they wanted in this place. However, he didn't care about how handsome Wei Liang was. Although he didn't want to see that person, he couldn't help but look down. Did that person finally come back? Qin Yu's expression was calm. He pretended to be courteous to the young masters around him who wanted to climb up to the Qin family. As he raised his head to drink, a trace of darkness emerged in the depths of his eyes. Li was ordering dishes. Ordering dishes was actually a science. There were many people ordering how many dishes, how hot or cold, how much soup or dry. All of these were things that had to be paid attention to. In the future, there were even special training for this. But today, everyone here was on the same side, so there was no need to worry about this. Xiao Chui was a qualified intelligence agent. She had unintentionally revealed to him what dishes Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing liked to eat. As for the sloppy old man, it was enough for him as long as he had candy to eat. When he ordered the 7th dish, Wan Ruoqing said, "This is enough. There are only a few of us, so we can't eat so much." Li ordered another dish and soup, and then he waved the waiter away. He didn't have to worry about wasting food. Since his martial arts had improved by leaps and bounds, his appetite had increased greatly. A mere 8 dishes and a soup was simply a piece of cake. Across from him, Miss Zheng seemed to have a lot on her mind. She didn't say a word, and occasionally she would be absent-minded. Li guessed that it should have something to do with Assistant Minister Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue. The fall of the Zheng family 10 years ago seemed to be inextricably linked to him, so it was no wonder that Zheng Zumo's mood was affected. He had heard Xiao Chui mention before that she would never come to the capital in this life because of this reason. Li was considering whether to tell those people that if Zheng dared to run around in the future and spoil their mood, he would break his leg so that he could go to court with crutches in the future. Wan Ruoqing didn't speak much of the truth, but as long as it was about the brothel or the shop, she would become talkative. Li was not a qualified boss. These things were actually taken care of by her. To be able to manage such a big business in an orderly manner so that he did not have to worry about the future for a woman, it was really not easy. Such a woman should be very good at running a household. Just when Li Yi's mind was somewhat anchored, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. "Ladies, are you interested in going up for a drink?" Of course, this sentence was not directed at him. When Li Yi looked over, he saw a strange man coming from behind, holding a wine glass in his hand. At this time he was looking at Wan Ruoqing and speaking. There was always no lack of lascivious men around beautiful women. This kind of situation was very common in this era, not only in this era but also in the future. Wan Ruoqing was originally talking to Li Yi with a smile on her face. She looked back and calmed down. She shook her head and said, "Sorry, we don't know you." "It doesn't matter. Don't you know me now?" The smile on the young man's face was even wider. He said with a smile, "I am Wei Junliang, and my father is the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights." From the moment he walked over to the moment he said these words, he had not looked at Li Yi once. There was no need at all. After all, there were many spoiled brats in the capital, and there were many that he could not afford to offend. But before this he had already done his homework. He was already familiar with those people's identities and appearances, but this young man in front of him was not included. Moreover, if he really was someone of status, how could he not have 2 decent guards by his side? As for the old man who looked like he was about to enter his coffin, he automatically ignored him. Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights? Li Yi thought about it and asked, "Isn't the Assistant Minister Qin Bo?" Zheng Zumo glanced at him and said in a small voice, "A few months ago the original Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was removed from his position and imprisoned. The current Assistant Minister's surname is Wei." Li Yi shook his head and said, "The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, a 4th-rank official. How can he be changed so easily? It's really not easy to be an official nowadays." Zheng Zumo looked at him in surprise. The reason the original Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was investigated was because of the account investigation a few months ago, and that matter. Wan Ruoqing's expression changed slightly when she heard the words Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. She glanced at Li Yi and wondered if this matter would affect him in any way. Then she looked at the young man and said, "Apologies, my friend is here." "Are you talking about this young lady?" The smile on Wei Junliang's face was still there. He said, "No problem, this young lady can come with us." "Apologies?" Wan Ruoqing's tone was calm. Wei Junliang's expression darkened. He said coldly, "This is not giving me face." Chapter 740. For Wei Junliang, what he cared about right now was not his face but the face of the person upstairs. He was full of confidence, but his meaning was already very clear. Just now Duke Qin had glanced down a few times. It was clear that he had thoughts about these two beautiful women. Of course, Wei Junliang himself also had thoughts about them, but in front of Duke Qin he could only give way. Only by satisfying Duke Qin could the Wei family advance further. This was not only his intention, but also the intention of his father, the assistant minister. Although he hadn't been in Jingdou for long, during this time as long as he announced his father's name, any woman would throw themselves at him. Even in Jingdou, an assistant minister was considered a high-ranking official in court. If he went back with his tail between his legs, not only would he lose face, but he would also be laughed at by the people above him. He would probably also leave a bad impression with Duke Qin. Wei Junliang's expression completely darkened. In a cold voice he said, "Miss, you won't give me face like this, will you?" Wan Ruoqing stood up and quietly said, "Sir, please go back. *tish, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." At this moment, Wei Junliang could no longer suppress the humiliation and anger in his heart. He raised the wine cup in his hand and splashed it toward her face. Wan Ruoqing's expression changed. As she retreated, a white hand appeared in front of her eyes and blocked all the wine. As she retreated, she accidentally bumped into a chair and lost her balance. At this moment, another arm seized the opportunity to wrap around her slender waist. Time seemed to return to 2 years ago. That night in Ningguang Manor, he seemed to have appeared in such a manner. The pain from her calf seemed to disappear into thin air. When Li Yi turned around and asked her, "Are you all right?" she shook her head and a faint blush rose to her face. To the side, Zheng Zumo raised her head and glanced at him. Her gaze quickly moved away. Wei Junliang narrowed his eyes and looked at the young man who had appeared in front of him. He said in a cold tone, "A hero saving the damsel in distress?" Although he had blocked the wine, Li Yi noticed that Wan Ruoqing's clothes were still stained with a few drops of wine. He shook his hand to get rid of some of the wine and walked over. He wiped the back of his hand on the luxurious clothes of the son of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. He said, "This girl's clothes are dirty. You have to pay for it. I'm honest with you. 10,000 taels of silver. Remember to send it over before tomorrow. You should be able to easily find out where they live. Remember, 10,000 taels, not a penny less." Wei Junliang was stunned by his action. By the time he reacted, there were already a few handprints on his clothes. Although this piece of clothing was expensive, it was not the most important thing at the moment. How dare he talk to me like that? That woman's clothes? Compensation of 10,000 taels? He really dared to say it. The people above should have seen what happened below. At this moment, Wei Junliang had no time to think about why the young man in front of him had the confidence to say these things to him. Instead, he calmed down and said lightly, "I want his hand." The two strong men who had been standing behind him heard this and walked up expressionlessly. "I want his hand." This sentence was somewhat familiar. Li Yi felt like he had heard it somewhere and it shouldn't be too long ago. Then he remembered where he had heard it. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. These young people always wanted someone's hand. Although it was cool to say such things, if they couldn't do it they would be suspected of being too pretentious. Doing things in a low-key manner, being a low-key person, there weren't many young people like him nowadays. In fact, when Wei Junliang came down, the shopkeeper of the restaurant had been watching from the side. He knew that the person in front of him was the son of the new assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. He had just moved to the capital and was in the limelight. Even the people behind him couldn't afford to offend him. This kind of battle was something he really didn't want to participate in, but if there really was a big mess in this restaurant, then this would be the end of his career as a shopkeeper. However, as soon as he stepped forward, before he could even show a flattering smile, he was glared at by Wei Junliang coldly. He shivered and immediately retreated. Seeing the two people walk towards Li Yi, Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo's expressions both changed. Although they knew that he seemed to know some martial arts, the two people in front of them seemed a bit imposing. The sloppy old man sat firmly in his seat. The big white rabbit was gone. He habitually tossed a broad bean into his mouth and said, don't panic. It doesn't matter how many of these people come. You have to believe in your man." At this moment, he sighed in his heart and even felt a tinge of sourness. No matter where this brat was, there was no lack of beautiful women by his side, whether it was at home or outside or even in the kingdom of Qi. That girl surnamed Lin must have some special feelings for him. To think that when he was young, Su Tian could be considered to be elegant and elegant, attracting the admiration of countless women. How could it be that at that time he was only focused on martial arts? As he thought of this, a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. Being interrupted like this, the two women blushed at the same time. Zheng Zumo turned back to glare at him and secretly spat. But at this moment, the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground could be heard. Looking back at the scene in front of them, both Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo were a bit stunned. The two men fell to the ground, each holding an arm. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down their foreheads. Wei Junliang's mouth was wide open and the shopkeeper's face was full of shock. Several of the diners who were paying attention to this table dropped their chopsticks to the ground. No matter how one looked at it, it was hard to tell that the two strong men did not even have the slightest ability to fight back in front of this frail-looking young man. When Li Yi walked over to Wei Junliang, the latter's expression had already changed a bit, but it was not obvious. He only said coldly, "No matter who you are, you can't bear the price for touching me." Li Yi smiled and reached out to tug at the corner of his mouth. He shook his head and said, "Young man, don't keep saying things like face and price all the time. That's not good." The scene before them was really quite dramatic. The two were about the same age. In fact, Wei Junliang looked a bit older. So when the young man put on the appearance of an elder and said those words to Wei Junliang as if he was reprimanding a junior, the scene was a bit out of control. At that moment, someone in the corner laughed. Even though the scene before them was beyond their expectations and they couldn't help but laugh, it also showed that this young man had a lot of scruples about the title of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. After all, Wei Junliang was the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. If he really treated him like how he treated the two guards and crippled one of his arms, things would be irreversible. Wei Junliang was naturally furious that his face was pulled in front of everyone. He wanted to say, "Who the F***ck are you?" but he didn't dare to. If he really angered this madman, it wouldn't be worth it if he got hurt. But after this he had to vent his anger. This madman in front of him and the two women, they could not escape from his hands. This guy called Wei Junliang was very stubborn. When he pulled him, it was far from the feeling of Xiao Huan and Mississippi Lu. Li Yi let go of his hand and patted his shoulder. He said, "Remember to pay for the clothes. Don't forget." Then he said to the shopkeeper, "Please hurry the kitchen, the food is too slow." The shopkeeper was stunned on the spot. How could he still think of eating at a time like this? Did he really think that they could eat this meal in peace? This person doesn't treat the assistant minister as an assistant minister. After saying that, Li Yi raised his head and looked at a certain place upstairs. He sighed softly with a complicated expression on his face. It was really a small world. When he looked away, a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. Some things, if done too much, will become meaningless. Chapter 741. Li Yi had not been idle at home for the past few days after his return. He cared very little about the matters of the court, such as the newly appointed assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights or the changes in other positions in the court. Compared to other matters, they seemed somewhat insignificant. The old emperor's health was deteriorating day by day, and the morning court had been stagnant for a long time. Other than a few major matters, most of the matters in the court were decided by the Minister of State, with the left and right prime ministers as the leaders. This system had been in place since the previous dynasty. The emperor could not personally govern in the short term, so it would not have too much of an impact on the running of the country. The matters of the court were only concerned with the general structure of the situation. Everything else was related to personal matters. Many things had happened in the capital in the past 5 months. Although the information was categorized and organized in an orderly manner, there was still a lot of information, so he only picked out the important ones. It included the two women being ambushed in the middle of the night and narrowly escaping. The death of Li Jianren, the son of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, was a major case that shook the entire capital, and there was still no conclusion. He still felt some lingering fear when he thought of this matter. If there was anything, it would be directed at him. He hated these people who schemed in the dark. If the so-called foppish young masters of the capital really lost their heads for a moment, they could mobilize a lot of power in a short period of time. It was fine if it happened once or twice, but not more than 3 times. How many times had this happened? Anyone who was kidnapped thousands of miles away when his wife was pregnant and could only return after a few months would feel a pent-up anger. This aura would not dissipate with time. These few peaceful days did not disperse the anger in his heart. Instead, he could not suppress his impulses. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at the sky, then walked over. Ruoqing pulled his arm and shook her head slightly. She whispered, "Don't be impulsive. I saw an acquaintance, so I went up to catch up. The dishes are here. Eat first, don't wait for me." Li Yi smiled and turned to pat her hand. He said, "I just want to tell them that I'm back." Li Yi looked at the slovenly old man and nodded slightly. He turned and walked up the stairs. I didn't expect that even the Vice Minister Gongzi would be ignored by others. Our young Master Wei is going to lose face this time. There are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the capital. How long has it been since he arrived? It's good to take him down a peg." Upstairs, even those who were at the same table as Wei Junliang just now were not necessarily of the same mind as him. Although they all needed to curry favor with young Duke Qin, they were also secretly competing with each other. Seeing Wei Junliang's setback, they naturally couldn't help but tease him a little. However, as soon as they finished speaking, they noticed that Zheng Zijian's expression had changed. As for young Duke Qin, his hand that was holding the wine cup stopped in midair, his expression slightly unnatural. The sound of footsteps could be heard as they went up the stairs one after another. The footsteps were short but powerful. In this quiet restaurant they were exceptionally clear. They quickly turned their heads and saw the young man who had been downstairs a moment ago walking up the stairs. What is he doing? The people downstairs who saw this scene all revealed expressions of extreme shock on their faces. The person sitting upstairs was an even more hedonistic hedonist than Wei Junliang. The shopkeeper raised his head to take a look. He seemed to have thought of something and suddenly felt a little dizzy. It can't be. 5 months was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. From when Wei Junliang came downstairs until now, some of the people present seemed to have remembered some people or things that had almost been forgotten. Their faces were stunned and their hearts trembled. It can't be. They muttered to themselves in their hearts. At this moment, Wei Junliang had also come back to his senses. Seeing that the person had already walked up the stairs, he quickly followed and shouted, "What are you doing? Stop." Under the astonished gazes of the restaurant customers, the contemplative gazes of the hedonists at the table, and the sound of Wei Junliang's hurried footsteps upstairs, Li Yi walked to the side of the table and to Qin Yu's side. "Is there a point?" He looked at Qin Yu with a calm expression, like an ancient well without ripples. Hearing this voice again after so many months, Zheng Zijian had to admit that his heart uncontrollably tightened and his palms began to sweat slightly. Those unerasable memories and the continuing pain in a certain part of his body caused him to lower his head, not daring to meet the gaze of the person in front of him. Some of the other young people at the table seemed to have remembered something. Their faces paled and they all lowered their heads. When the others saw that this person actually spoke to young Duke Qin in this manner, they were mostly astonished but even more vigilant. They were not fools and naturally understood that at this time, it was not the time for them to interrupt. "What do you mean?" Qin Yu raised his wine cup, his expression indifferent as he gently took a sip. "I said." Li Yi's voice paused, "Is there a point?" When he said the last sentence, his voice was slightly raised. Slap. The slap was loud and clear, followed by the sound of porcelain breaking. The people at the table saw the young man slap young Duke Qin's face. The wine cup in young Duke Qin's hand flew out of his hand and a swollen handprint quickly appeared on his face. It was hard to describe what they were feeling at this moment. Madman, he really is a madman. Does he even know what he's doing? The moment the slap sounded, Zheng Zijian's body trembled slightly. How many times? How many times? The King of Shu, Royal Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin. If he was not wrong, this should be the third slap he had given to Qin Yu's face. Wei Junliang had already run up the stairs wanting to go over and stop that madman. Then his footsteps stopped. To be exact, one of his feet had already been raised but he did not know how to take a step forward. He maintained this posture with his mouth wide open and his expression dull. He was not the only one who was stunned. The customers on the second and first floor as well as the restaurant manager were also stunned. Everyone thought that when this young man faced the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, he chose to compromise and did not dare to do anything too extreme to Wei Junliang. However, now that he had slapped young Duke Qin's face, was he telling them that the son of a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights was not qualified enough? The slovenly elder ate a broad bean and looked up in astonishment. He had to admit that this was the first time he saw this side of this boy. Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo's expressions changed at the same time. They stood up and quickly walked upstairs. One side of Qin Yu's face was already swollen and looked somewhat comical. He stood up and met Li Yi's gaze. His eyes were calm as he said, "This matter has nothing to do with me. The Qin family will not let this go. Young Duke Qin's words, without a doubt, were like throwing another boulder into the already turbulent lake. This time it set off a raging wave. What did he mean by "this matter has nothing to do with me"? Regardless of whether or not it had anything to do with him, with his status, shouldn't he pay back 10 times, 100 times more, and even make the other party beg for death? With a swollen face, what was the meaning of such a serious explanation? Was this still the young Duke Qin who was lawless, robbed women and took liberties with women? He had been slapped in public and still had to give such a serious explanation. This was simply the role model for the capital's playboys. When the top 10 playboys of the capital were selected next year, he would also have a chance to be nominated. On the other hand, wasn't it a bit too much for the young man in front of him to bully an honest playboy? Of course, that was what it looked like on the surface. However, at this moment, everyone knew very well that this unfamiliar young man was someone that even young Duke Qin could not afford to offend. There were also some people who, after carefully rummaging through their memories, finally thought of something. Then they understood that after today the capital would most likely become lively again. "It wasn't you?" Li Yi was startled and then said somewhat apologetically, "Then I'm sorry, I hit the wrong person." Having said that, he turned his head and looked at Wei Junliang. "Then tell me, who was it?" Being stared at by that cold gaze, Wei Junliang suddenly felt his legs go weak and he knelt to the ground with a thud. Chapter 742. Arrogant. He was simply too arrogant. Among the younger generation of the capital, there wasn't a third person who dared to slap Duke Qin in front of everyone. The reason why it was the third was because there was one person who wasn't in the capital. However, there was only one person who could say, "Sorry, I got the wrong number," in such a nonchalant manner after the slap, and let the matter pass so easily. If Wei Junliang still didn't know that this unfamiliar young man in front of him was someone he couldn't afford to offend, including Duke Qin, then he would have lived the first half of his life in vain. However, while he understood, there were others who didn't. Arrogant, too arrogant. A 14 or 15-year-old youth slammed the table and stood up. He ordered the group of guards behind him, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and bring him to the authorities." Immediately, 2 guards walked over from behind and looked around. When they saw that the guards of the other young masters hadn't made a move, they couldn't help but freeze on the spot and didn't dare to step forward. Wei Junliang's 2 guards were still lying on the floor. They didn't think they were stronger than those 2. If they insisted on putting on a strong front, they might end up like them. "Wang Yu." Someone beside him reminded him in a low voice. Just by looking at Duke Qin's reaction, they knew that today's matter was beyond their control. How could an unrelated person from a branch of the Wang family act like a big shot at this time? "Wang Yu?" Li Yi raised his brows and asked, "Which Wang family?" The youth had a smug look on his face as he said loudly, "Luochuan Wang family. Do you dare to offend the Luochuan Wang family?" The Qin family only relied on Prime Minister Qin. Without Prime Minister Qin, the Luochuan Wang family, which had a deep foundation, would far surpass the Qin family in terms of family wealth and influence. As a super family that could stand up to the Cui family, there weren't many in the entire Jing kingdom. Of course, Wang Yu was only a junior from the branch of the Luochuan Wang family. His status in the Wang family couldn't be compared to the direct descendants like Wang Yong and Wang Dan. However, this didn't stop him from using the Wang family's name to scare outsiders. Even in the capital city where heroes gathered, the words Wang clan of Luochuan could indeed shock a large group of people. "Wang clan?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Go ask Wang Yong and see if he dares to speak like this." "You." Wang Yu's face turned red. As a young man, he was unwilling to admit defeat. He pointed at Li Yi and shouted, "You'd better remember what you just said." For the time being, the group of playboys who didn't know the background of the person in front of them were all startled when they heard this. From his words, it seems that he doesn't even care about the Luochuan Wang clan. Qin Yu glanced at him, turned around and walked outside without a word. At this moment, countless people widened their eyes. Leaving just like that? Did the dignified young Duke Qin suffer that slap just now for nothing? Li Yi stretched out a hand and blocked Qin Yu's path. The corner of Qin Yu's mouth twitched. He gritted his teeth and said, "Don't go too far. You think it's not you just because you say it's not you?" Li Yi glanced at him. "If the Qin clan wants an explanation, tell them to come find me in person." Since he couldn't settle down anymore, he might as well tell some people directly that he was back. Although he had left the capital for a long time, he wouldn't be bullied by the son of a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing came up from downstairs. Zheng Zumo tugged on his sleeve. Li Yi turned around with a smile and said, "It's fine now. Let's go down and eat." Zheng Zijian's expression changed. He finally gritted his teeth and walked out of the crowd. He said in a low voice, "Zumo, slap." Zheng Zijian's eyes widened. He covered one side of his face and looked at Li Yi in disbelief. Li Yi looked at him and said coldly, "You think you can call me Zumo?" Zheng Zumo tugged on his sleeve again and said in a low voice, "He's the son of Assistant Minister Zheng. So what if he was the son of Assistant Minister Zheng? Could the son of Assistant Minister Zheng do whatever he wanted? The son of Assistant Minister Zheng. The son of Assistant Minister Zheng should be Zheng Zumo's cousin. They didn't know each other." Li Yi waved his hand apologetically and said, "Sorry, I hit the wrong person again." Countless people present were petrified upon hearing this. Now, the price for beating up these playboys in the capital was so low. Was that all they needed to say was an apology? A flurry of footsteps came from downstairs. The officials were always one step late. Earlier, when the situation was getting out of control, the owner of the restaurant had already sent a waiter to report to the authorities. He couldn't afford to offend anyone here. Although he couldn't afford to offend the magistrate of the capital, he didn't know the magistrate of the capital, so he'd better leave this headache to him. In fact, when County Magistrate Liu heard the news, he had already cursed all the female relatives of these playboys. Damn it, had it been easy for him these days? He was classified as County Marquis Li's faction and was ostracized by the King of Shu's faction everywhere. Without County Marquis Li, he didn't even have anyone to talk to. He had to deal with chores all day long. These bastards always caused trouble. If he didn't handle it well, he would be caught again. This magistrate of the capital was so useless. He hurried into the restaurant and asked loudly, "Where is the person who beat up people?" "Sir, over there." The owner immediately pointed upstairs. "Who dares?" County Magistrate Liu strode up the stairs. He was about to raise his head and question when he suddenly stopped. His face lit up with joy. He quickly walked over and said in surprise, "Sir Li, when did you come back?" Although it was more appropriate to call Li Yi County Marquis Li, he had gotten used to it when he was in Qingyan Prefecture and had never changed it. "I just came back a few days ago." Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Liu and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you for a long time." "County Magistrate Liu, you're still as elegant as ever." Seeing that the capital official who had hurried over was actually talking about the old days with that young man, countless people at the scene were immediately dumbfounded. Zheng Zijian was slapped, but at this moment, there was no hatred in his heart, only fear. He knew why young Duke Qin didn't dare to return the slap after being slapped. He also knew why that person could even ignore the Wang family of Luochuan. It was because he and these people were no longer on the same level. He was the youngest marquis in the Jing kingdom, the dean of the academy, the teacher of the princes and princesses, the favorite of the emperor, and even had the power to mobilize the secret intelligence bureau. He was not a playboy, because the biggest playboy in the capital only relied on the blessings of his father's generation. When their father's generation saw him, they also had to give way to him. County Magistrate Liu suppressed the joy in his heart and looked behind him. He asked, "Sir Li, the matter here, the younger generation is insensible and needs the elders to teach and advise them. Otherwise, I'm afraid they will go astray in the future." Li waved his hand and said, "It's just a small matter. There's no need to trouble Sir Liu. Let their elders take them back and discipline them well." As soon as these words came out, everyone at the table, including Zheng Zijian, changed their expressions. He meant that all the people present today, none of them could leave. If their elders came here to take them back, they would probably be turned upside down after they went back. At this moment, County Magistrate Liu had already understood some meaning from Li Yi's words. He was secretly delighted. This time, County Marquis Li was really angry. It was a good opportunity for him to frighten those who secretly played tricks. County Magistrate Liu waved his hand, and the yamen runners and constables behind him had surrounded the stairs. He smiled and stretched out his hand saying, "Sir Li, please." Li looked back at the two women and said, "Don't stand here. Let's go down and eat." Under the gaze of all the people in the building, they went down the stairs. When passing by the shopkeeper, Li looked at him discontentedly and asked with a frown, "What's the matter? It's been so long but not a single dish has been served." The shopkeeper shuddered all over and immediately said, "I'll go and urge them right away." Right away. After saying that, he ran to the kitchen. He had already made up his mind that if the chef couldn't cook those dishes in 15 minutes, he didn't need to come here tomorrow. Chapter 743. It turned out that it was necessary to urge the waiter when eating out. Soon after he urged the waiter began to serve the dishes one after another. Come on, eat more fish to nourish your body. Eat more vegetables too so that the nutrition will be balanced. This dish tastes good. Try it. County Magistrate Liu, have you eaten? Do you want to sit down and have some? As a result, such a strange scene appeared in the restaurant. It was very quiet in the restaurant. The playboys were blocked upstairs, feeling nervous and panicked. The young man downstairs had already started to pick up food for the two girls from time to time, and did not forget to comment on them. This kind of strong contrast gave everyone quite a shock. Was he really so fearless? Although those playboys couldn't leave for the time being, their guards had been released, and they might have rushed back home to report this matter. Was that young man going to face the Qin family, the Wang family, the Zheng family, and the Wei family alone, which was powerful enough to shake the capital? After such a thing happened, the diners on the first floor and the second floor were naturally not in the mood to eat anymore. Some people were worried that they would be affected by the matter, so they left in a hurry. Some people thought that the following scene might be even more exciting and they wanted to stay and watch. Of course, from County Magistrate Liu's attitude and the young man's fearlessness in the face of such powerful people, many people had already guessed his identity. Yes, in the whole capital, who dared to disrespect Prime Minister Qin and the officials of King of Shu except County Marquis Li, who had been silent for a long time. After a long silence, when he reappeared in people's sight, it set off a monstrous wave again. In any case, there would be a big show today. Upstairs. Although one side of Qin Yu's face was swollen, he was quite calm, and he even sat down again, drinking and eating as if nothing had happened. However, his other hand, which was hidden in his sleeve, was clenched into a fist, with blue veins popping out, indicating that he was not as calm as he appeared to be. Zheng Zijin covered one side of his face, and the fear in his heart was greater than anger. He finally came back. Li Jinren was dead, and after Qin Lisan was saved by the dung, he shut himself in his room and refused to see any guests. When Cui Shixin went out, he would always be accompanied by more than 10 guards. Obviously he was scared out of his wits. All this had nothing to do with that person because what he was best at was to kill others with a borrowed knife. Whenever he thought of being targeted by such a person, he would feel a chill in his heart. Thinking of this, he immediately looked at Wei Junliang with deep disgust. Wei Junliang walked over in a daze. He didn't dare to look at Qin Yu. He looked at the others and murmured, Who is he? Zheng Zijin didn't answer, but the young man who spoke just now raised his eyebrows and said, No matter who he is, he's dead for sure this time. The Wang family will send someone over soon. I want to see how he'll explain to the Wang family then. Among the people present, many were descendants of rising officials, so they could not wait to get involved with the Qin family and the King of Shu. However, they did not expect that such a thing would happen with young Duke Qin around. Among the people present, many of them were descendants of new officials. Therefore, they couldn't wait to get involved with the Qin family and the King of Shu. However, they didn't expect that such a thing would happen with little Duke Qin around. Wei Junliang looked at the crowd and felt a little relieved. There were so many people and there were so many families behind them. Who did he think he was? Even the Qin family would have to think twice before going against so many people at the same time. What's wrong? The food is not to your taste? Li Yi asked in surprise, looking at the two women who did not seem to be in high spirits. Zheng Zumo glanced at him. She really could not find a second person who could still be in the mood to eat under such circumstances. She pointed upwards and asked, Is there really no problem over there? Li looked up and waved his hand saying, Don't worry, it's fine. He picked up another piece of tender fish and put it in her bowl saying, Eat it quickly. It will get cold soon. Looking at the pile of fish in the bowl, and even the fish bones were picked out and put aside, Zheng Zumo shook her head, but she was still worried. Wan Ruoqing did not speak again. Seeing that Li Yi did not care at all, she had already understood that he was not impulsive in this matter. As for the deeper reason, she did not care much. She only needed to know that as long as he was there, all the difficulties were not difficult. The sound of hurried footsteps coming from outside the door immediately affected the hearts of the people in the restaurant. A young man with a calm temperament walked in quickly. The first thing he saw was County Magistrate Liu sitting on the side. He frowned and asked, Lord Liu, what's going on? Before County Magistrate Liu could speak, someone had already shouted upstairs. The young man named Wang Yu leaned on the railing, waved his arms and shouted, Big brother, I'm here. Wang Yong looked up and saw that the stairs had been surrounded by officials. He frowned again. County Magistrate Liu was worried about how to explain to the eldest son of the Wang family. On the other side, a faint voice came over. "Brother Wang, long time no see." Hearing that, Wang Yong was stunned at first and then overjoyed. He turned his head and walked over quickly, asking, "Brother Li, you're back." Not to mention that the cooperation between the two families had brought great profits to the Wang family. The two families had advanced and retreated together. Even what his father said made him have to treat Li Yi specially. Originally, he heard that Wang Yu had caused trouble outside and was detained. For the sake of the Wang family's reputation, he came in person. He did not expect to meet Li Yi here, which was a pleasant surprise. Just by looking at Wang Yong's attitude, Li Yi knew that his family must have made a lot of money recently. Wang Yong simply moved a chair over and sat down next to Li Yi. He asked with a smile, "When did you come back?" Li Yi smiled and said, "Just a few days." From the moment Wang Yong stepped into the restaurant, he naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. The eldest son of the Wang family, the future head of the family, would eventually have to control that huge organization. His every move would be of great importance and would be watched by countless people. Originally, they thought that Wang Yong would definitely get back at the Wang family for being humiliated. In the capital or even the Jing kingdom, not to mention the royal family, there were only a handful of people of the same age who could be compared to him. However, his expression made everyone disappointed. Of course, there were more surprises. From the situation before them, it was obvious that the two of them knew each other. Furthermore, judging from Wang Yong's attitude, it could be said that he was extremely friendly. Even the fathers of those rich kids upstairs would not be able to make the future head of the Wang family humble himself like this. In an instant, the status of the young man in their hearts rose to another level. Wang Yu leaned on the railing and looked at the scene below with his mouth wide open. The strong contrast between his expectations and reality made it difficult for him to adapt. That was his eldest brother, his savior. How could he start a conversation with that guy? His eldest brother, Wang Yong, was different from him. He was the eldest brother of the younger generation of the Wang family and was also someone whom the family had high hopes for. From a young age, he had been groomed to be the next head of the family and had a lot of prestige among the younger generation. Now that the Wang family had been humiliated, shouldn't he be angrily getting back at them? Why did the scene before him happen? Wang Yu did not have too much time to be surprised. Downstairs, after clarifying the cause of the matter, Wang Yong's originally smiling face had already darkened. He stood up, looked up and said coldly, "Get down here." Wang Yu's face revealed a look of horror. He grabbed the railing tightly because if he let go, he would directly collapse to the ground. Chapter 744. In the end, Wang Yu still came down. The branch he belonged to was only one of the branches of the Wang family and was not valued by the Wang family. Even his father did not dare to put on airs in front of the eldest young master of the Wang family. "I'm really sorry, Brother Li. The Wang family did not teach you well and caused you trouble." Wang Yong looked at Li Yi apologetically. When he turned around, his face instantly darkened and he said coldly, "Quickly apologize to County Marquis Li." He was angry not only because Wang Yu had offended someone he shouldn't have, but also because Wang Yu had made friends with someone he shouldn't have. This was something the Wang family could not allow. The young man named Wang Yu no longer looked arrogant. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, "County Marquis Li, I'm sorry. I was wrong." Hearing his soft voice, Wang Yong's face darkened and he said, louder, "Didn't you eat?" Wang Yu raised his head and looked at Li Yi. He said loudly, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Li Yi looked at him with a faint smile and asked, "Why don't you tell me where you were wrong?" Wang Yu was stunned and then he had an urge to cry. Yes, where did he go wrong? He just came to have a meal with his friend and did not offend anyone. Why was he blocked here? What did he do wrong? The young man still could not stand the grievance. As he thought about it, his eyes became a little moist. Wang Yong said apologetically, "I'm really sorry about what happened today. Brother Li, I will pay you a visit and apologize in 2 days." Wang Yong left with Wang Yu. Paying a visit and apologizing was only one reason. The cooperation between the Wang family and the Li family was more important. After not seeing each other for 5 months, he still had a lot of things to discuss with Li Yi. The people who stayed in the restaurant were a little disappointed. The future head of the Wang family had come personally, but nothing exciting had happened. It was really boring. However, Wang Yong's attitude towards that person had truly shocked them. The situation in the capital was very complicated. If the future head of the Wang family treated him so cautiously, they didn't know if he could still control the big shots that came one after another. Eat more vegetables. You should eat more too. Maybe because the atmosphere was ruined, Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo were very polite today. Li Yi had to keep putting food on their plates to ease the atmosphere. It was unlikely that Miss Zheng would pick up food for him. Wan Ruoqing smiled as she picked up the food from a distance and placed it on his plate. After scanning the three for a long time, the sloppy old man took a big bite out of his drumstick and looked away, unable to bear to look at them any longer. In a carriage on the street, of Yu and Zheng Zimo, he couldn't bear. In the end, he could not help but raise his head and ask in a low voice, "Big brother, who is that person?" "Sha." Wang Yong glanced at him and said, "I won't tell your father about what happened today, but if you still interact with those people in the future, don't blame the Wang family for being heartless." Yong to Wang's words. What happened today left a deep impression on him. He had never seen his usually gentle brother show such an expression. How could he not take his brother's words to heart? At the same time, that smiling face left an indelible impression in his heart. Outside the carriage, a sedan chair hurriedly passed by, heading for a restaurant. Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights rushed into the restaurant and immediately saw the two guards of the Wei family holding their arms. His eyelids twitching, he walked over and asked, "Where's the young master?" Wei Junliang waved from above. Father, I'm here." When Wei Junliang ran down, the officials didn't stop him. Assistant Minister Wei looked at him and asked with a frown, "What's going on?" Wei Junliang stammered and didn't say a word. Even young Duke Qin didn't dare to resist when he was slapped. Even Wang Yong had to treat him with respect. As his father, no matter how he thought about it, he wasn't good enough. Assistant Minister Wei. County Magistrate Liu walked up and cupped his hands at the man. "Lord Liu." Assistant Minister Wei recognized him. He looked at him and asked, "What exactly is going on?" Li Yi tilted his head and glanced at him, saying, "You'll have to ask Assistant Minister Wei's son." "Who are you?" Assistant Minister Wei only heard that his son was detained by the officials and hurried over. He didn't know the specifics, so he looked at the young man who interrupted and asked with a frown. County Magistrate Liu stepped forward and said, "This is Marquis Li." "Marquis Li?" Hearing this title, Assistant Minister Wei's heart skipped a beat, but he still asked, "Which Marquis Li?" "Marquis Chang An," County Magistrate Liu answered. This time, Assistant Minister Wei's heart completely sank. Marquis Chang and Li Yi. This name was really well known. The King of Shu and even Prime Minister Qin's faction had suffered great losses at his hands. It was impossible to estimate how much damage they had suffered. In the current imperial court, the two factions were opposing each other, and this Marquis Li was a key figure in the opposing faction. Even the Qin family behind him had to avoid him, let alone a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Moreover, as the new assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, he knew better than anyone how he got his position. Especially after listening to County Magistrate Liu's story, cold sweat began to drip uncontrollably from Assistant Minister Wei's forehead. It was already hard enough for him to have a conflict with this person, but what was even more frightening was that his side wasn't in the right. Assistant Minister Wei lowered his head and said solemnly, "It's all my fault for not teaching properly and offending Marquis Li. This official will take him back and discipline him properly." Li Yi waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "It's fine. It's normal for young people to be impulsive. Assistant Minister Wei, there's no need to punish your son too much. It's better to guide him." Assistant Minister Wei froze for a moment and immediately nodded. Yes, I understand. Many thanks, Marquis Li." At this moment he was extremely astonished. This Marquis Li was so reasonable and didn't seem as difficult to deal with as the rumors said. It seemed like he was very easy to talk to. "Let's not talk about the conflict for now." Li looked at him and said, "However, your son dirted my friend's clothes just now. I don't know. He should compensate." Assistant Minister Wei fiercely nodded and said, "This is how it should be. I will make him compensate for this young lady's clothes." If everyone was as reasonable as Assistant Minister Wei, it would save a lot of trouble. Li smiled and said, "Since it's like this, I won't say anything else. Assistant Minister Wei, don't forget to deliver 10,000 taels of silver to Willow Alley before tomorrow." "Of course, one." Assistant Minister Wei nodded and then froze for a moment. He asked with some uncertainty, "How much?" Even if the clothes were completely made of gold thread, they wouldn't be worth 10,000 taels of silver, right? I must have misheard. A trifling 10,000 taels, Sir Wei definitely won't take it to heart. Li waved his hand and said, "Then it's settled. Sir Wei can take your son away." he naturally wouldn't take 10,000 taels of silver to heart. It wasn't that the Wei clan couldn't take it out, but if he really did, he would probably have to pay for his coffin. At this moment, Assistant Minister Wei finally understood that this wasn't a matter of compensation. This was a warning and also a deterrent. If the Wei clan paid 10,000 taels of silver, then this matter would be settled. Otherwise, his position as the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights would probably have to change. Assistant Minister Wei didn't doubt that the seemingly harmless young man just now had this kind of ability. He didn't know how he left the restaurant and walked on the street in a daze. At a certain moment, he was startled awake and hurriedly said, "Quick, quick, to the Qin estate." "Father?" Wei Junliang had just said one word when he was slapped across the face by Assistant Minister Wei, attracting the attention of all the pedestrians on the street. "Father, you hit me?" Young Master Wei, who had never been treated like this before, covered his face and said in disbelief, "Isn't it just a county marquis?" "You are the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights and have Uncle Qin behind you. Why are you afraid of him?" "How did I give birth to such an idiot like you?" Assistant Minister Wei fiercely glared at him and said through gritted teeth, "Do you know why the previous Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was imprisoned?" Chapter 745. After Wang Yong, Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights also left with his son. They didn't lower their voices on purpose so the people in the restaurant could hear them clearly. 10,000 taels of silver. Just because the girls' clothes were stained with a few drops of wine, the Wei family had to pay 10,000 taels of silver as compensation. This price was unimaginably high. Of course, those who could sit here and eat were not ordinary people at the bottom of society. Compared with ordinary people, they naturally had a better sense of politics. The officialdom had always been like a battlefield. The situation in the court changed every day, not to mention in 5 months. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the Qin family had never been on good terms with King of Shu's faction. In fact, before he left the capital, King of Shu's faction had secretly made a lot of moves. Many people with a keen sense of smell had sensed it. However, County Marquis Li left the capital at that time. Coincidentally, the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works besieged and killed 2 girls on the street. Then, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works was investigated. Overnight, he turned from a high-ranking official to a prisoner. His Majesty was furious about this. During that time, King of Shu's faction didn't dare to do anything out of line for fear of provoking the emperor again. However, as time went by, they began to move again. His Majesty happened to be ill, so the morning court session was not held. Except for important matters, everything else was handed over to the Minister of Rights to make decisions. As a result, they became more and more unscrupulous. However, County Marquis Li came back. Today's matter naturally couldn't be easily understood. This was a response and a demonstration. It could also be said that it was a declaration to those who were hiding behind the scenes. Thinking of all the things that happened 5 months ago, some people were secretly shocked. It seemed that there would be a big storm in the capital again. After the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, several powerful officials came one after another. Of course, they were the parents of the playboys upstairs. This meal wasn't peaceful at all. Li was a little regretful. The good atmosphere had been ruined by these ignorant fellows. He knew some of these people, but he had never heard of some of their names. It seemed that a lot of things had happened in the capital in the past few months. He didn't have the mood to greet the others. After all, except for Wei Junliang, most of them were sitting quietly. He didn't want to extort them again. Without a good reason, he couldn't ask them for compensation. He couldn't just say that he didn't like them, right? This was too much. After warming up a little, he felt much better. He didn't want to deal with those people anymore. Therefore, he left those nobles and officials to County Magistrate Lu. Seeing that the 2 women stopped moving their chopsticks, Li also put down his chopsticks and asked, "Are you full? If you are, let's go." Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo looked at each other and nodded. Li looked back at County Magistrate Lu. "Mr. Lu, please take care of this. It's no trouble at all." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand again and again. If he was alone today, he naturally couldn't control such a situation. However, with County Marquis Li standing behind him, he didn't need to worry too much about the families of those people. As the 2 of them spoke, a few more people walked in from outside. Every time someone came in, a small commotion would erupt. "Who is this? I don't know him. Is there such a person in the circle of officials and nobles in the capital? You don't even recognize him? Isn't he the 5th master of the Qin clan?" After being enlightened by one person, everyone suddenly understood. The Qin manor was prosperous. Prime Minister Qin had 5 sons, and 3 of them were officials in the court. When the Qin clan was at its peak, the 2 of them held important positions in the Shangshu province and directly participated in the affairs of the court. Although the Qin clan's current power couldn't be compared to that time, it still couldn't be underestimated. The 4th master of the Qin clan was low-key. Although he didn't participate in court politics, he had a lot of influence in the business world. Only the 5th master of the Qin clan didn't have any talent, but in terms of fame in the Qin clan, he was probably second only to the biggest playboy in the capital, young Duke Qin. There was no other reason. 2 years ago, a scandal broke out in the Qin clan that shook the entire capital, and it happened to 5th Master Qin. Young Duke Qin, who had always had a special fetish for married women, had unexpectedly set his sights on his own uncle one day. Taking advantage of his drunkenness, he forced himself on the concubine that 5th Master Qin had taken in. After 5th Master Qin bumped into him, he kicked him out of the room. The concubine couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide on the spot. At the time, this matter was very big and caused a huge uproar in the entire capital. Later, for some reason, it was left unsettled. After that, young Duke Qin was still young Duke Qin, but 5th Master Qin was no longer that 5th Master Qin. His identity had become his humiliation. Because of his identity as 5th Master Qin, everyone fawned over him on the surface but secretly mocked and disdained him. In the future, no matter how quickly the Qin clan soared, 5th Master Qin would never be able to raise his head again. County Magistrate Liu went over to greet him. Li Yi's gaze briefly met with a brawny man behind the middle-aged man before quickly moving away. Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing stood up, but the latter's body swayed. If it weren't for Li Yi's timely support, she probably would have fallen to the ground. "What's wrong?" Li Yi asked with concern. Wan Ruoqing frowned slightly and said, "I think I bumped into something just now." When she was avoiding that man just now, her calf bumped into a table and chair. At that time she was nervous and didn't feel anything. Now that she was completely relaxed, there was a burst of pain. Zheng Zumo walked over to help Li Yi support her. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Can you still walk?" "It's fine." Wan Ruoqing shook her head. With Zheng Zumo's support, although it was a bit difficult to walk, she could still move slowly. Qin Yu and 5th Master Qin didn't have much communication. When they walked down the stairs, they didn't look at Li Yi and walked straight out of the restaurant. When Li Yi and the 2 women walked out, they just happened to see Assistant Minister of Revenue Zheng Shichen rushing over. He looked at Zheng Zumo with an extremely surprised expression. Zheng Zumo lowered her head and didn't say anything. On the street, seeing Wan Ruoqing frown with every step, Li Yi felt that the asking price for the clothes just now was still a bit too low. That Wei guy had gotten it too easy. However, after all, he was a man of his word. It was hard to take back what he had said. It was not appropriate to raise the price now. If he could not deliver the money by tomorrow, it would be reasonable for him to double the compensation. Presumably, the other party would have nothing to say about it. "Does it hurt a lot?" The street was bustling with people and carriages couldn't go through. Seeing Wan Ruoqing's tightly furrowed brows, Li Yi finally stopped and asked. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said with a smile, "It's fine." Her brows didn't even relax, so this smile looked a bit forced. Li Yi walked in front of her and squatted down. "Come on up." "Ah." Wan Ruoqing stilled slightly. When she understood what he meant, her pretty face blushed. He was different from all the men she knew. Although she had tried her best to get used to the way the 2 of them interacted, she still felt that putting food on each other's plates was the limit of what she could do. This was something she had only gotten used to after a long time, because when he said these things, his eyes were always as clear as water, without a trace of lust. Other than him, if it was anyone else, she would most likely think of them as a lecher and wouldn't give them any good looks. But habit was habit. If she was carried by him through the crowded streets and watched by so many people, just thinking about it made her face a little hot. Zheng Zumo also looked at this scene in a daze. At this time, Li Yi had already begun to urge. "It will be dark by the time we walk back like this." Li Yi looked back and said, "Let's hurry, it's not the first time anyway." The first time he was talking about was naturally when she had fainted from a high fever when she came out of Ning Wangfu and Qing'an Fu. Zheng Zumo turned her head with some difficulty. "Not first time?" Chapter 746. Wei Junliang's mind was still muddled as he stepped through the gates of Duke Chen's estate. Just now, while they were walking, he had already heard his father describe the past of that Marquis Li. He had beaten Duke Qin, Royal Prince Duanyang, and the king of Shu in front of all the civil and military officials. Who knew how many playboys in the capital had suffered at his hands? Qin Lisan had locked himself in his home and refused to see anyone, Shui Shixin had become a frightened bird, Duke Qin had just been slapped, the king of Shu had been banished, and royal prince Duanyang had become a eunuch, and that Marquis Li was still safely staying in the capital. These were his past achievements. However, this was not all. His reputation was not built from fighting. He was also the head of the Mathematics Academy and the teacher of many princes and princesses. A few months ago, the vigorous investigation in the capital had been carried out by a student of the Mathematics Academy. The fall of the previous assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Qin Bo, was also during that investigation. It was because Qin Bo was imprisoned that his father had the opportunity to be pushed out of the spotlight by the Qin family. After some maneuvering in court, he was transferred from a place far away from the capital to here. From a certain perspective, he had gone from a playboy in a remote place to a playboy in the capital. Should he thank that person? But why did he still feel a little guilty? Wei Ji was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. With the powerful support of the Qin family with his current age, it was not impossible to take a small step forward before he retired. However, at this moment he no longer dared to think about these things. The most important thing now was to solve the problem in front of him. Just as he stepped through the gates of the Qin family, Wei Ji looked at the gatekeeper and said somewhat impatiently, "Is the manager here? I have an urgent matter." The current manager of the Qin family was Qin Qin, but the manager that Wei Ji spoke of was the second master of the Qin family, Qin Chong. He naturally had his reasons. Qin Chong was his brother-in-law, so it would be more suitable for the two of them to communicate. "Miaoyu, I heard that the brothel has a new show these days. I heard that it is not bad. Do you want me to go with you some other day?" In a small garden behind the Qin residence, there were many artificial mountains and flowing water. Qin Chong walked to the pavilion and smiled at a white-haired lady. The white-haired woman looked at the water with a hint of worry hidden between her brows. When she turned her head, her brows relaxed. She shook her head and said, "Second brother is busy with work. I'll let Xiu accompany me for these things." Qin Chong shook his head and smiled. "I don't have much to do recently. Whenever you want to go, second brother will take a leave to accompany you." The white-haired woman didn't say anything else. As a dignified official, she stood outside the courtyard and looked at him with a smile on her face. A servant of the Qin manor walked over and pointed at a place not far away. He said respectfully, "Second master, Lord Wei of the Board of Rights is here." He knew about the relationship between Sir Wei and the second master, so he didn't stop him and brought him here. A hint of confusion appeared on Qin Chong's face as he asked, "The Bureau of Rights has been rather busy these past few days. How did you find the time to come here today?" Wei Ji revealed a dejected expression and said, "It's all because of this brat." When Wei Junliang saw Qin Chong, he only called him uncle, in a low voice before lowering his head and remaining silent. Qin Chong glanced back at the pavilion and pointed ahead. "Let's talk over there." "Second brother, there's no need." A gentle voice came from behind him. The white-haired woman had already walked out. After nodding slightly at Wei Ji, she looked at Qin Chong and said, "You can talk here. I'll go take a walk in the back." Saying this, she walked deeper into the garden with the two servant girls. Qin Chong nodded and then walked into the pavilion. "Speak. What exactly is the matter?" The Wei family could be considered to have some power in the capital. They wouldn't go so far as to seek out the Qin family just because a junior had caused trouble. Wei Ji sighed and said, "Today Lianga was eating in a restaurant. Because of a woman, he got into a conflict with someone. You want the Wei family to pay 10,000 taels of silver for a mere piece of clothing?" After hearing this, Qin Chong didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled and asked, "I'd like to know in the capital who would be so bold?" "The Marquis of Chang'an County, Li Yi," Wei Ji said gravely as he looked at him. The smile on Qin Chong's face froze. His gaze was like lightning as he looked at Wei Ji and asked word by word, "Who, did you say?" "The Marquis of Chang'an County, Li Yi," Wei Ji repeated. Qin Chong's face darkened. He looked at Wei Junliang and asked, "Speak. What exactly happened? Don't leave out a single word." Hearing this icy voice, Wei Junliang shivered. When he spoke again, his voice was trembling and tears were about to fall. I and young Duke Qin." After hearing Wei Junliang's words, Wei Ji saw that Qin Chong's face was dark and that he hadn't said anything. He couldn't help but feel uneasy and asked, "That 10,000 taels of silver?" He actually came back. Qin Chong clenched his fists and muttered, "What does this mean? A warning?" Chen Chang's expression became calm again. At a certain moment, he turned his head to look at Wei Ji and said, "That 10,000 taels of silver, just think of it as buying a lesson." Hearing this, Wei Junliang's expression immediately changed. Because Wei Ji was already mentally prepared, he only revealed a bitter expression and didn't speak. When did he say? Before tomorrow. Qin Chong waved his hand and said, "Go back and prepare before the sky darkens." Behind the fake mountain, a delicate figure leaned against it, a hint of a smile on her lips. She closed her eyes, put her palms together and sincerely said, "Thank the gods and Buddhas, it's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." When Wei Junliang walked out of the Qin estate, both sides of his face were swollen. In the end, he still ended up in the same state as Duke Qin, except that the former had been beaten by the Marquis of Li Yi, while he had been beaten by his own father. There were many wastrels with swollen faces like him in the capital today. The people of the capital were shocked to see a few important figures walk out of a restaurant with gloomy expressions. The young people following behind them were crestfallen, as if they had been hit by frost. After teaching their own juniors a lesson, the officials and nobles of the capital all had extremely complicated expressions on their faces. That person was using this method to tell them that he had returned. Although the atmosphere between men and women in the Jing kingdom was still somewhat traditional, there were many reasons for a man to carry a woman on his back and walk on the street. At most, people would look at him a few times, but it might not necessarily be considered indecent. However, when they returned to Willow Lane and put Ruoqing down, her face was still red to the ears. Li didn't have anything to be shy about. After all, it wasn't the first time he had carried her on his back. Besides, she had carried Xiao Huan, Mississippi Lu Yongning, and the Tsundra Lolita. In comparison, although Mississippi Lu usually didn't show off, she actually had the best figure. Li Yi discovered this when she taught him how to ride a horse last time. Next it should be Wan Ruoqing. Xiao Huan was still young, so there was still room for development in the future. Li Yi stopped some thoughts in time, looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, "See how your injuries are. Do you need to call the doctor over?" The blush on Wan Ruoqing's pretty face hadn't faded yet. She shook her head and said, "No need. After a while you should be fine after applying some medicinal wine." "Let's see." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Let's see how serious the injuries are first." Wan Ruoqing's face became even redder. Her injuries were on her calf. If he wanted to see, wouldn't he have to take off her shoes and socks and roll up her pants? But how could a woman's private area be so easily seen by others? Zheng Zumo glanced at Li Yi and said, "You go out first." Li Yi looked at her and asked in confusion, "Why? A woman's private area? Is that somewhere you can look?" Zheng Zumo glared at him again and said, "I'll just watch from here." Li Yi then realized that this wasn't the future, where the streets were full of white legs and some girls' pants couldn't even cover their buttocks. This was still an era where one had to be responsible for looking at a girl's feet. However, what Miss Zheng said wasn't quite right. If she couldn't look at her feet, then other places. Some images emerged in Li Yi's mind, and he couldn't help but look at her a few more times. Seeing that he was looking at her strangely, Zheng Zumo seemed to have thought of something. Her face turned redder than Ruoqing's, and there was a hint of annoyance in her voice. "Get out now." After waiting outside for a while, Zheng Zumo came out, her cheeks still red. She glanced at him and said, "I looked. It's just some bruises. It shouldn't be a big deal." Li Yi nodded and said, "I'll have someone bring some medicine for bruises later." There were many good things from the palace at home, which should be better than those sold in the medicine shop. Zheng Zumo didn't speak and didn't look at him. The atmosphere began to become a bit awkward. Li Yi looked at the sky. It was time to go back to cook. He looked back at her and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back first." Zheng Zumo waved her hand. "Go." Li Yi thought about it, turned around, opened his arms and said with a smile, "We haven't seen each other for a long time. Won't you give me a warm hug?" "Ba lecture." Zheng Zumo looked at the faint smile on his face and glanced at him. She snorted and turned to walk into the room. Li Yi smiled and shook his head. However, when he turned his head, an imperceptible disappointment appeared in his eyes. "Hey, stop." He heard the voice behind him and turned around. A warm and fragrant body pressed against him. Zheng Zumo's body left immediately, leaving behind a fragrance that didn't belong to any of the perfume from Rui workshop lingering in his nose. Li looked at her and murmured, "I did hug, but it wasn't warm enough. Ba lecture shameless." Zheng Zumo took a few steps back, her face even redder than before. Li smiled, turned around and walked out the door, waving his hand casually behind him. "See you tomorrow." Zheng Zumo watched his figure go away before withdrawing her gaze. She said in a daze, "See you tomorrow?" Chapter 747. When Zheng Zumo turned and walked into the room, there was a faint smile on her lips. Wan Ruoqing put on her clothes, got out of bed and asked. He left. Zheng Zumo nodded and walked over to help her up. She said softly, "Stay at home and rest for the next 2 days. Don't move around." Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "I'm not that delicate. It's just a knock. It won't hurt after a while. There are still things at the brothel that cannot be delayed. You should rest well. I'll go to the brothel." A teasing smile appeared on Zheng Zumo's face. "Sister Ruoqing, it doesn't hurt anymore, but I'm afraid someone else will." "What are you talking about?" Wan Ruoqing's face, which had already returned to normal, turned red again. Zheng Zumo blinked her bright eyes and asked in a gossipy tone, "You just said it wasn't the first time. What happened?" Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "I told you before it was at Qing and Fu. That night at Ningwang Fu. After I fainted that day, I was carried back by him." Zheng Zumo finally remembered something. But at that time, a certain person was still a lecher in her heart. She only cared about Wan Ruoqing's physical condition. She blinked her eyes and asked again, "Is it really just like that? What else can it be?" Wan Ruoqing glanced at her and asked, "Is there going to be a warm hug?" Zheng Zumo's face instantly became as red as blood. After coming back to her senses, she looked at her with some panic and embarrassment. "Well, you dare to make fun of me?" In embarrassment and anger, she reached out to tickle Ruoqing, but she didn't forget to divert some attention to avoid where Ruoqing was hurt. The two often played this kind of game. Usually there were only them, Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu in the small courtyard, so they didn't have to avoid anything. Wan Ruoqing couldn't move freely today, so she was naturally at a disadvantage. After a round of confrontation, she was soon ridden by Zheng Zumo. Panting slightly, she said with a smile, Stop messing around." Zheng Zumo pressed her down with one hand and put the other hand on her lower abdomen. "Tell me, do you still dare to make fun of me?" After the fight just now, both of their clothes were a bit messy. Although Zheng Zumo had won, a large part of her shoulders were exposed. It was as if she had taken off Ruoqing's toenails, revealing her smooth and jade-like feet. She had tickled Ruoqing just like that. At this moment, the posture of the two was really charming. It was as if Ruoqing was lying on her back on the bed, and Zheng Zumo was riding on her waist. It was very much like a legendary posture. Li Yi walked in from outside and was slightly startled when he saw this scene. His gaze swept over the two of them and his throat moved involuntarily. After a long time he said, "I just want to ask, do you still have osmanthus cake?" The expressions of the two women on the bed froze at the same time. "If not, then forget it. I'll ask again tomorrow. You guys continue." Li Yi turned around and strode out the door. He grabbed a pillow that flew out from inside and gently threw it back. It's not right to throw things around. It's not good to hit too many people. Even if it doesn't hit anyone, it's not good to hit flowers and plants. This time, the pillow flew out even faster and with even more force. Li Yi stood in the yard and stretched comfortably. The scene he saw yesterday still made his blood boil when he thought about it. No wonder Bai Ji had a poem called, "Holding the pipa and covering half of your face." Only when it was half covered could it be called temptation. It could leave a lot of room for imagination, and the more one thought about it, the more shameful it would be. Li Yi originally wanted to go to the city to see the new house this morning. Fang had selected a few according to his requirements, but the final choice was still up to Li Yi. When he got up, he felt as if he had forgotten something. After washing up, changing clothes and walking out of the house, he finally understood when he saw the carriages coming from afar. He was afraid that today would not be peaceful. County Marquis Li has returned to the capital. Congratulations. An old man who looked like a butler came down from the carriage in front and said with a smile, "I'm here to congratulate you on behalf of my lord." "Your lord is?" "The Minister of Revenue." "Oh, it's Lord Qin." Li Yi nodded. Before he could say a few more words, another person came up. "Deputy Minister Ma." Li Yi cupped his hands. Li Yi knew this person. During the investigation of the accounts, the Divination Academy and the Imperial Censorate had forged a deep friendship. Deputy Minister Ma was the second in the Imperial Censorate, and this time he came in person. Deputy Minister Ma smiled and said, "I'm very happy to hear that County Marquis Li has returned to the capital. I've prepared a small gift to show my respect." Please come in." The The servants of the Li family had already come out and moved the things from the horse into the house. Li glanced at it casually. It was a small gift, but it didn't seem to be a small gift at all. The butler of the Qin's mansion and Deputy Minister Ma did not say much before they left. Before Li Yi had time to drink water, another person came to visit. This time it was the Shen family. Li Yi did not have any friendship with Prime Minister Shen and the Shen family. Last time when the Lioli Glaze exhibition was held in the palace, the Shen family stood up and spoke for him. Although he did not know why they came to join in the fun, he could not neglect them. However, this was only the beginning. Li Yi admitted that he had many enemies in the capital, but he also had many friends. This matter involved many factions in the imperial court and the struggle for interests. It was not something that could be explained clearly in a few words. He had some friendship with the Minister of Revenue and the Imperial Censorate. It was not surprising that the Wang family came. Of course, there was no need to mention the family of generals. Even the Shen family, thinking about it, it made sense. He had actually mentally prepared for these things the day before. However, when some officials and nobles he had never even seen before also came to offer gifts, he was truly surprised. Among these people, some were the parents of students in the academy and had a reason to visit. However, there were also some who had no relationship at all. The old woman of the Li family stood by his side. Seeing his confused expression, she patted his hand and said with a smile, "To be able to become a duke at your age is the first in decades. This is not strange at all. Ever since the founding of the country, unless there had been great achievements in expanding territory and benefiting thousands of years, the nobility had not been increased. Only some old officials who had toiled for the country their entire lives or fierce generals who had fought their entire lives would receive a small nobility before they died to protect their descendants. To be able to go from a commoner to repeatedly receiving the emperor's favor and become a duke in a short 2 or 3 years was an inconceivable matter. He was still very young and still had limitless potential. Given the emperor's high regard for him, who knew how far he could go in the future, it was better to make friends than to make enemies. In just one morning, the house's empty storage room was filled to the brim with gifts. Even so, there was still an unending stream of carriages coming in from outside, so much so that the servants of the Li family were somewhat overwhelmed. At this moment, Li Yi suddenly felt that there was no meaning in working so hard to expand his business. If he needed money, he would disappear for a few months. If he disappeared a few times a year, wouldn't he be able to become rich by accepting gifts? Chapter 748. The servants of the Li family moved carts after carts of gifts into the house. Li Yi stood in the yard thinking of new ways to earn money. He couldn't keep disappearing. It would be fine if he disappeared once or twice, but people weren't fools. If he disappeared too many times, they might suspect that he was cheating. In this way, the reputation he had worked so hard to build would be ruined. He thought about it carefully. When he married Rui, he was in a daze and didn't even remember what happened. This was the first time he got married in his life. It was too hasty. He had to find a chance to hold a formal wedding in the future. He had to make it grand and earth-shattering. He had to invite the royal family, the Wang family, and any rich family in the capital. As for Li Xian, it would depend on how many gifts he gave. In this way, there would be many opportunities to receive gifts in the future. On second thought, it seemed that his birthday was coming. In the past 2 years, he had spent it with Rui and the others at home. Should he make a small celebration this year? Well, it was worth thinking about. "Young master, that room is full." Old Fang walked over and said with a surprised expression. It wasn't a festival today, but the number of people who came to send gifts almost reached the outside of the village. "Clean up another room." Li Yi waved his hand. When he was about to go out to have a look, he saw someone who surprised him. County Marquis Li. When he saw Li Yi again, Assistant Minister Wei's attitude was very humble. No matter how many gifts others gave, this Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights was on the side of the King of Shu and had a close relationship with the Chen family. How could he come at this time? Was he attracted by my charisma and wanted to forsake darkness for light? Assistant Minister Wei glared at Wei Junliang and said angrily, "Unfilial son, apologize to County Marquis Li." One side of Wei Junliang's face was still swollen. He said in a trembling voice, "County Marquis Li, it's all my fault for offending you. Please forgive me." Although the two of them were about the same age, Wei Junliang didn't dare to treat the other person as someone who was on the same level as him. Wei Ji forced a smile and said, "Marquis, the compensation for the girl's clothes has already been delivered last night." After leaving the Chen family yesterday, the last glimmer of hope in his heart was extinguished. Although he had just been transferred to the capital not long ago, He had long heard of County Marquis Li's murderous methods. If they were targeted by him, even if he had the Qin family behind him, they could forget about having a good ending. Li smiled and said, "Sir Wei is truly trustworthy." Wei Ji nodded repeatedly. Of course. Seeing the two of them still standing there, Li probed, "Does Sir Wei want to go in and have a cup of tea?" Of course, the meaning of this sentence was not to invite them in for tea. To be precise, it should be, "Why are you still here? Do you want me to invite you in for a cup of tea?" Wei Ji was a shrewd old man, and his ability to read people's thoughts and body language was also first-rate. Naturally, he could understand what he was trying to say. "County Marquis Li is busy, we'll go back first." "Sir, you're back." A young man walked in from outside and looked at Li Yi with a happy expression. Then, he looked back and asked in confusion, "Sir, is that the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Wei Ji?" Li Yi patted Louis Zhang's shoulder and said with a smile, "You're already the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, don't call me sir." Louis Zhang smiled and did not agree or refute. Some habits could not be changed in a short period of time. Moreover, he did not intend to change them. "Isn't Wei Ji from the Qin family?" A trace of doubt appeared on Louis Zhang's face and he asked, "Why is he here?" Wei Ji patted his buttocks and left. Only now did Li Yi realize that this guy had only brought his son today. Visiting without giving a gift, how rude. "I don't know." Hearing Louis Zhang's words, he shook his head and said, "I heard that Assistant Minister Wei spent 10,000 taels of silver to buy a piece of clothing. How extravagant. He's just a small assistant minister. His entire life salary can't even add up to that much. I don't know where that money came from. When you go down, you have to be more careful. Corruption is not allowed." Louis Zhang's status in the Secret Intelligence Bureau was not low. The Secret Intelligence Bureau was a sharp sword hanging above the heads of the officials. It was used to supervise and warn them. Fighting corruption was also one of their duties. Louis Zhang was startled for a moment before nodding and saying, "This subordinate will remember." Originally, he had planned to go out early today to look at the residence and then inspect the shops and fences. Looking at the situation outside, this plan would probably have to be put on hold for the time being. He would have to wait until the afternoon to see what the situation was like. "I heard that you slapped Qin Yu again in the restaurant yesterday. That was really satisfying. It's a pity that I wasn't there." Li Xian strode in with a regretful expression on his face. His personality was that of a bystander. He could even kick the King of Shu twice. He had even beaten up Qin Yu once before. What kind of sin did young Duke Qin commit? As the saying goes, those who do too much evil will bring about their own destruction. He always liked to steal other people's wives. Every time he went out, he would either be slapped or seriously injured. This was retribution. After establishing the Academy of Sciences, Li Xian became a true scientific maniac. He couldn't usually see the heir's wife since she was in the palace. He could only vent all his energy on research. Li Xian didn't come alone. His brother-in-law Wang Yong followed behind him. He stepped forward and said to Li Yi apologetically, "I'm really sorry. I have already punished Wang Yu for what happened yesterday. I hope Brother Li doesn't take it to heart." "How could I? If a child is disobedient, I can just hang him up and give him a beating." Li Yi wasn't someone who liked to hold grudges. He waved his hand to show that he didn't care. "Let's talk inside." Wang Yong probably came to discuss matters related to cooperation with him. As a friendly business partner, his attitude towards him was naturally better. After the tea was served, Wang Yong only took a sip and went straight to the point. He described in detail to Li Yi about the matters related to the colored glass business in the past few months. A few months ago, when Li Yi left the capital, it happened to be the day when the Wang family's colored glass bazaar ended. The number of colored glass sold at the bazaar was carefully planned to not only meet the needs of the rich in the capital, but also not appear to be common and cause the price to fall. The royal family, the Wang family, and the Li family made a lot of money in those days. After that, in order to ensure continuous profits, except for the occasional small amount of colored glass sold by the Wang family around the capital, there were no more large-scale sales of colored glass. Waves of foreign merchants walked out of the capital, leaving their footprints all over the Jing kingdom. They walked out of the Jing kingdom and went to the world so that the light of the rising sun could shine further. I don't know what channel the Chui family has used, but they have also accumulated a lot of colored glass in their hands. Wang Yong frowned slightly and said, "Although they haven't been released for the time being, I heard that the Chui family will hold a colored glass appreciation conference in the capital in a few days. This is not good news for us." Li Yi certainly knew how the Chui family got their colored glass. and he had been paying attention to the news from the Chui family. However, he did not know that the Chui family was also going to hold a colored glass appreciation conference. It seemed that even if there was an intelligence system, sometimes it was not as well informed as these century-old clans. The Chui family actually had a lot of businesses under their name, and they were involved in a wide range of fields. The Li family almost had an absolute monopoly on the business of perfume and spirits, but there were not too many secrets in the area of ready-made clothing or weaving. There were countless imitators, and the Chui family was the largest imitator. Even if the quality and reputation of the imitators were not comparable, it would still more or less affect the business of the Chui family. Miss Zeng also complained to him yesterday that these imitators with bad intentions used inferior materials at low prices and had a very bad reputation among the customers, affecting the entire ready-made clothing circle. It seemed that during the days when he was not in the capital, the Chui family was jumping around quite happily. Colored Glass Appreciation Conference? Li Yi smiled and murmured, "It seems that it's time to release a large number of foreign merchants." Wang Yong's face showed a puzzled expression. He looked at him and asked, "A large number of what?" Chapter 749. It was not easy to find a large group of foreign businessmen with blonde hair and blue eyes, but it was possible to find a large group of foreign businessmen who were not fluent in the official language. The Chui family had almost monopolized the jewelry industry in the Jing state. Although the Wang family was a large family with many industries, it was only in the past few months with a large number of liuli that they had a foot in it. In this regard, their influence was still inferior to the Chui family. Colored stones had always been a rare commodity and were known as auspicious. They could only be found but not sought. Although a large number of them appeared some time ago, there were so many rich people in the capital that the number could not meet everyone's needs. After a few months, the Chui family's colored stone appreciation party naturally attracted people's attention again. Especially those who failed to get it for various reasons the last 2 times, they began to be impatient early. Emperor Jing only wore an outer robe. After a meal he took a walk in the garden as usual. He wondered, where did the Chui family get so many colored stones? How would I know? Li Yi shook his head and said, however, the emergence of a large number of colored stones is not a good thing. If it is not controlled well, it makes a big mess. Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, what do you mean? Colored stones are precious because they are rare. If colored stones are like the gravel on the ground and can be found everywhere, then there is no value to speak of. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, Your Majesty, think about it. If someone with ulterior motives sells the gravel at a sky-high price and the world rushes to buy it, then all the silver in the world will fall into the hands of that person. In this way the world will be in chaos. You mean that the Chui family has accumulated a large number of colored stones. Once they are released, the capital will be in chaos? It is only a possibility. Li Yi shook his head and said, recently, I just want to stay at home peacefully and take care of my own affairs. I can't manage the Chui family. Peacefully? Emperor Jing glanced at him. These days, the memorials of impeachment in the court have piled up higher than the table. Is this what you mean by peacefully? This is really unfair. I heard that you let people block more than a dozen of the capital's playboys in the restaurant and let their elders personally take them away. There are countless people who can testify that I was bullied. You even made Wei Ji pay 10,000 taels for a piece of clothing? Your Majesty, aren't you curious as to how an assistant minister like him got so much silver? Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you this time. Since Wei Ji could be pushed out, it's impossible for him to have made any major mistakes. Even if he made some small mistakes, he will only be fined a few months' salary at most. Your Majesty, what are you saying? How could this subject be disappointed? This subject can't be more than happy for your Majesty to have an uncorrupted official like Assistant Minister Wei. Li Yi said with a disappointed expression. Alright, stop pretending in front of me. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, you have nothing to do at home these days. You might as well go to the palace to accompany Shanning and Yongning. They are close to you. As a princess you can't run out of the palace every day. A place like the palace was too depressing and was not suitable for children to live in. However, the 2 little girls had different identities and could not go out of the palace every day. In fact, when they were at home it was quite lively and noisy. It was like a family. Rui also liked the 2 little girls. Recently she liked children more and more. When Li Yi walked out of the imperial garden, 2 small figures each carrying a small school bag were already waiting for him outside. They did not need to stay in the palace all day. Every day, they would be sent to the Princess Royal's Women's College at a fixed time. Of course, due to their identities, they had specialized female teachers there and did not have many opportunities to interact with other people. Goodbye, Imperial Father. The proud Lolita waved at Emperor Jing from afar. Li Yi held one of them in each hand and walked out of the palace. Emperor Jing looked in that direction for a long time until the figures of one big and two small figures completely disappeared. Only then did he withdraw his gaze. His face showed some envy. Changde hesitated for a moment and went forward to say, County Marquis Li said that if you move out of the palace, it will be very beneficial to your body. Recently the weather has been hot. Your Majesty, why not move to Tsujiang Courtyard? Emperor Jing looked around and saw the tall palace walls. His expression was a little sad. He murmured, I also want to. Li Yi had already decided on the new residence 2 days ago. It was not far from the mathematics college. The place was very big and the environment was quiet. It was the most suitable for a vacation and nurturing the fetus. The original owner was a wealthy merchant in the capital. He originally refused to sell it, but after hearing who was buying the residence, he completed all the procedures on the same day. The new residence could not be moved in immediately. Before that, Li Yi had to spend a few days to redecorate the inside so that it would be comfortable to live in. He had already thought about it. When the time came, he would not bring so many people to the new residence. He would only bring a few servant girls to be responsible for the daily cleaning work. As for taking care of Rui, he could do it himself. Speaking of which, he had been taken care of by others for 2 lifetimes. Now he had truly learned to take care of others. Of course he had to thank Mississippi Lu. In the Qi Kingdom, when she was injured and he raised her like a pig, he cooked and brewed medicine every day. From time to time he would take her out to relax, chat with her and sleep with her. He had never taken care of anyone like this before. It had also changed some of Li Yi's carelessness. All right. Husband, I really can't drink anymore, Rui said helplessly as she put down the spoon. Drink another mouthful. Li Yi picked up the spoon and blew on it before carefully reaching it over. He had brewed this soup for a long time. It was very nourishing and was most suitable for a pregnant woman to drink. Of course, one could drink it even if they were not pregnant. This soup had a comprehensive effect and tasted good. Xiao Huan had already drunk 2 small bowls. After drinking the last mouthful, Rui refused to drink any more no matter what. Li Yi saw that there was still quite a lot left in the soup bowl. It would be a waste to pour it away. After all, he had spent a lot of effort on this soup. He then turned to look at Xiao Huan. The little servant girl touched her slightly bulging belly and said pitifully, Young master, I can't drink any more. Li Yi shook his head. When he was about to pour the soup bowl out, he paused. Mississippi Lu was not practicing her swordsmanship in the courtyard. She put autumn water aside and sat by the stone table. She stared blankly in a certain direction. This scene made Li Yi's expression become a little dazed. It was as if he had returned to the small courtyard beside Fanglin Park. In the past she rarely stared blankly like this. However, he did not know when it started, but Li Yi often saw this scene in front of him. The girl had grown up and had something on her mind. Mississippi Lu was not like Xiao Huan. Everything was written on her face. Although the two of them were very familiar with each other, it was undeniable that Li Yi had never seen through her thoughts. Drink some soup? Li Yi walked over with a small bowl and placed it on the stone table. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and did not say anything. It's delicious and nourishing. Li Yi looked at her and said, Your body has not completely recovered. You should drink more. I'm not drinking. Just drink a mouthful. I'll give you the white rabbit creamy decoction later. Li Yi habitually pinched her chin. After blowing on it, he passed the spoon over. Mississippi Lu opened her mouth and also habitually swallowed. Then Li Yi's hand froze. She seemed to have realized something. She lowered her head and looked down, but there was no expression on her face. This scene had actually happened often in the past. She would never go along with Li Yi's character. Whenever something happened, she would first resist a little and then reluctantly give in. For a long time she had been drinking medicine like this. She drank a mouthful of medicine and was rewarded with a white rabbit creamy decoction. The two of them were used to this kind of transaction. However, just now, they seemed to have forgotten that this was no longer the Qi Kingdom. It was no longer the small courtyard beside Fragrant Forest Park where only the two of them resided. Sorry? It was a habit. Li Yi was the first to react. He quickly retracted his hand and did not let her drink the soup. He was ready to run away at any time. Mississippi Lu did not have any special reaction. She only glanced at him and said calmly, Put it down. Put the soup down. Mississippi Lu repeated. After making sure that she was not angry at all, Li put down the bowl and looked at her in surprise. This wasn't her style at all. Mississippi Lu glanced at him. Why are you still here? Li looked at her and said, You're a little strange today. Holding autumn water in her hand, Mississippi Lu narrowed her beautiful eyes and asked, How strange? Strange? Seeing that the familiar Mississippi Lu had returned, Li took a step back and said with a smile, You're quite pretty. Chapter 750. You're a little weird today. How so? You're so pretty. This sentence could even be used as a golden phrase to pick up girls in the future. Although the girl would not burst with joy after receiving such a compliment, she would still feel a little happy. However, in today's era, any girl who stopped a random girl on the street and said the same thing would definitely not feel shy or happy. Scolding her as a lecher would be considered a light punishment, and if it was serious, a slap would be very likely. Mississippi Lu took a small sip of the soup and looked up at Li. She asked, What did you say just now? I didn't hear you clearly. I said you're pretty good today. An upright person was not afraid of a crooked shadow. At times like this, Li's expression was serious and his words were righteous. He did not feel guilty at all. I wasn't pretty in the past? Li was surprised that Mississippi Lu could say such a thing. It was a free question. He shook his head and said, I was pretty in the past too. Then what's nice about me today? Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, Am I as pretty as Miss Zhang in Willow Lane? This was a free question. The sun was a little dazzling today. It was so dazzling that Li could not see Mississippi Lu's pretty face clearly. Oh my, the sun is really poisonous today. It's so bright that I'm going blind. I can't see or hear anything. Fang closed his eyes and stood in the courtyard. He fumbled around with his hands. When he felt his way out of the courtyard, he even tripped on the steps and almost fell down. He was still complaining. Pretentious. Li looked at Fang in disdain as he stumbled out. He turned back to look at Mississippi Lu and curled his lips. It's cloudy today. Where did the sun come from? Why don't you find a good reason to lie? Li looked at the door worriedly and said, Maybe there's something wrong with Fang's eyes and ears. I'll go take a look. Fang walked in from outside again. He scratched his head and said, I forgot to tell you that those people have returned from Shuzhou. He handed a letter to Li and said, This was given to second miss by Miss Yang Liuqing. Miss Yang didn't come back with them this time. It seems that she left alone in Shuzhou. After saying that, he looked up at the sky and waved his hands in the air as he groped his way out of the courtyard. Li, Mississippi Lu, as well as Fang and the others, had set off before the rest of the crowd. They had traveled day and night, so naturally they had to return to the capital first. The remaining team of nearly 100 people came back from Shuzhou under the leadership of Yang Liuqing. However, Fang just said that she didn't come back with the others? Li walked over and handed the envelope to Mississippi Lu. This is for you. He thought that since those people had returned, the materials donated by the king of Shu should have arrived. It was a lot of money. How should he spend it? I finished drinking. Remember to wash the dishes. After a while, Mississippi Lu had finished reading the letter. She put it on the table and stood up. She didn't argue with Li about what had just happened. She turned around and went back to her room. Li picked up the letter in surprise and looked at it. After a while, he slowly put it down. He glanced at the closed door of Mississippi Lu's room and frowned slightly. Yang Liuqing had left. Just as suddenly as she came, she left just as suddenly. She didn't say where she went, nor did she say whether she would come back. She just thanked Mississippi Lu in the letter for teaching her martial arts in the past 2 years. These 2 years were the happiest 2 years of her life. She would never forget all of this. She would always have such a master. She couldn't repay the kindness of giving her a new life. There was nothing else in the letter after that. Li's index finger gently tapped on the table. A look of reminiscence appeared on his face. Excuse me, does Rui Lu live here? The young girl who was about the same age as Mississippi Lu appeared before him more than a year ago. She carried a small bag on her back and held a long sword in her hand. The cold expression on her face was exactly the same as Mississippi Lu's. At that time, she wanted to challenge Rui, who was ranked first on the hero ranking board. She talked about the rules of Jianghu every time she opened her mouth. After losing to Rui, she wholeheartedly wanted to be her master. Although Mississippi Lu didn't agree, Li was still a little surprised at her perseverance. Every day before dawn, she would come over to boil water, chop firewood, and clean the courtyard. She almost took care of all the chores in the house. Before her, Mississippi Lu was the most hard-working person that Li Yi had ever seen. After her, Li Yi had never seen anyone who worked harder than her. She seemed to be carrying a heavy burden that had been buried in the bottom of her heart. She had never revealed it to anyone. In the past 2 years, the only thing that she had done was to continuously surpass herself. From a petty thief who knew some kung fu, she had now become a top-notch master. Although she was still a long way from becoming a master or a master like Mississippi Lu, the speed of her improvement was too fast. She had a bright future ahead of her. Even now, she was ranked at the top of the heaven ranking board. Li Yi didn't know what she was carrying that made her so strict with herself. She was curious about the reason why Yang Liuqing left, but she was more concerned about Mississippi Lu's feelings. Her cold and unapproachable face was just a facade. She was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. She never talked much. She would prove everything with her actions. If she hadn't recognized her as a disciple from the bottom of her heart, she wouldn't have spent so much effort to cultivate her. Although she didn't show it on the surface when she left just now, Li Yi saw some different expressions on her face. Shuzhou. Li Yi had always known that Yang Liuqing had a secret. Especially on the way back from the Qi Kingdom, this feeling became stronger. Thinking of something, Li Yi walked out and entered another small yard. Second granduncle was asleep on the rocking chair. The sloppy old man squatted far away, flipping through a yellowed book. When Li Yi walked over, he didn't even notice it until Li Yi coughed softly. He hurriedly stuffed the book into his sleeve, raised his head and asked, "What's wrong? Are you going out?" As a martial arts grandmaster, it was inconceivable that he would need a reminder to realize that someone was approaching him. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What book are you reading, Su? You're so engrossed in it." Hearing this, the sloppy old man straightened up and said with a smile, "A profound martial arts secret book. You won't understand it even if I tell you." It turns out that the men and women in the profound martial arts secret books don't wear clothes. Li Yi didn't expect him to be so reserved at such an old age. With his status and strength as a guru, he still needed to rely on this kind of book to solve his personal problems. He said with a smile, "Su, if you like it, I'll give you some more profound secret books next time. The color pages are very precious." Having seen more real and exciting things, although he was not very interested in those traditional picture books, it was still very easy for him to get a few. The sloppy old man said seriously, "You misunderstood. This is really a secret book." "I know." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, Su. I won't tell anyone." If the news that a Wulin guru liked to read erotic books was released, the sales of Wulin tabloids would definitely increase greatly. After smiling, Li Yi's face became serious and he asked, "Does Su know something about Yang Liuqing?" The sloppy old man was about to explain. Hearing this, he looked at him and asked, "What happened to her?" "She left, so I want to know something about her." Li Yi told him about Yang Liuqing's departure. If this matter had no beginning and no end, he was afraid that Mississippi Lu would always feel uncomfortable. The sloppy old man thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "The martial arts she used seemed to be from an old guy in the Wu Kingdom." "The Wu Kingdom?" Li Yi frowned slightly. The sloppy old man looked a little nostalgic and nodded. "If I'm right, she should have some relationship with the royal family of the Wu Kingdom." Chapter 751. The Royal Family of the Wu Kingdom? The expression on Li Yi's face had already turned into one of astonishment. This world was completely different from the history he knew, including the current countries and all kinds of major events that had happened in history. Since the wheel of history had gone awry, he couldn't find anything that he could refer to. Of course, last time he had stored all the books in Hongwen Library in his head, so he was not unfamiliar with the current situation of the surrounding countries. There were a total of 3 countries that directly bordered the Jing Kingdom. Needless to say, the Qi Kingdom and the Zhao Kingdom had been in constant conflict with the Jing Kingdom in history, and the current situation was still a little tense. The other country was the Wu Kingdom. Although the Jing Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom could not be called allies, there had not been much conflict before. For decades they had not invaded each other. The 4 countries had always maintained a delicate balance between them. The Qi Kingdom was indeed powerful and ambitious, so it was guarded against by other countries. But it was impossible for it to be the enemy of several countries at the same time. Even if the Zhao Kingdom cooperated with them for a short time, they had their own ideas, and it was impossible for them to be of one heart and one mind. The relationship between the Jing Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom had always been stable. For a long time, there was not much difference in the strength of the 2 countries. However, several years ago, A certain prince of the Wu kingdom launched a coup without any warning, killed his brother and father, and sat on the throne himself. Since then, the Wu kingdom had been in a long period of turmoil. The loyal officials in the court were either dead or hiding. Several generals guarding the border, with the reason of bringing order to the chaos and supporting the legitimate wife, gathered troops and rebelled against the court. There were also countless rebel armies in the country, forming a group of heroes and forming a separatist regime, which gave the current court of the Wu kingdom a headache. These words were once again confirmed by the sloppy old man. Li Yi had known for a long time that Monster Su was from the Wu kingdom. However, when one's martial arts cultivation reached such a realm, most of them would choose to go out and travel in order to make a breakthrough in their lifetime. As a result, the concept of countries and the like was much more vague. After the former emperor was assassinated, Empress Wendy also committed suicide. After gaining power, the second prince killed the crown prince with a cup of poisoned wine. Empress Wendy's youngest son and the 14-year-old princess Duanrong disappeared. They must have been hidden by the ministers loyal to the former emperor. The sloppy old man just narrated slowly without any extra expression on his face. How could that old fellow Yang Wanli just watch such a thing happen? Did something happen to him? Li looked at him and asked with a frown. Su means, the sloppy old man said, Yang is the surname of the Wu kingdom, and that little girl knows Yang Wanli's famous technique. Even if she isn't a member of the royal family, she must be related to that old fellow. This was all he could get from the sloppy old man. Li thought for a while. Although she was young and was good at doing those rough jobs, if he thought about it carefully, he would find that apart from these things, she always seemed to hide some kind of temperament. Inadvertently, it overlapped with a girl who liked to eat egg fried rice. The next time he entered the palace, he would ask the eldest princess about the situation in the Wu kingdom. The royal family must have some secret ancient books that he couldn't see. When Li walked back, he glanced at the tightly closed door of Mississippi Lu's room and felt a slight headache. Her only disciple had left without saying goodbye. She definitely wouldn't feel good in her heart. Furthermore, she was the kind of person who kept everything in her heart and wouldn't tell anyone. Even if he wanted to make her happy, he didn't know how to break through from this angle. Rui was like this when she was young. She kept everything in her heart. When father and mother left, she didn't cry. She didn't eat or drink. She just sat by the bed in a daze for 3 days. Rui looked at him and shook her head. If she has something on her mind, she won't listen to anyone. Li Yi showed a helpless expression and said, if she keeps it in her heart for a long time, it will cause problems. Don't worry, husband. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Rui smiled and brought the wooden basin over. She put it by the bed and tested the temperature of the water. She said, husband, soak your feet first. Ever since Rui got pregnant, she was not allowed to intervene in any of the family's matters. With her physique, as long as she was not fighting another grandmaster, she would not be affected at all. However, this was an order from the old mistress. Xiao Huan followed her every day because the old mistress could not stay idle and wanted to do something. She had cried a few times. However, during the days when Li Yi came back, she would fetch a basin of hot water every night and wash his feet personally. Li Yi looked down at her delicate side profile. His eyes were in a trance and he suddenly jumped off the bed. Rui seemed to be a little scared. She looked up at him and asked in confusion, husband, you used to wash my feet. Today it's my turn to wash my wife's feet. Li Yi looked at her and pointed to the bed. He said, sit down. How can I do that? Husband, how can you? Rui shook her head repeatedly. Li Yi picked her up and put her on the bed. He said, it's natural for a husband to wash your wife's feet. Why can't you do that? Come on, sit down. The water was just right. Li Yi slowly took off her shoes and sock and soaked her feet in the wooden tub. Her feet were delicate and as white as jade. Her toes were neatly arranged like round pearls. Li Yi reached out to hold them and could feel that her body was a little stiff. Although he had helped her wash her feet many times, it was the first time he did something like this. She couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Li Yi didn't show any abnormality. He lowered his head and was patient and careful. The woman in front of him was his wife. She was the closest person to him in this world. Compared to what she had done for him, this was really nothing. At first, he thought that he had always been honest in his previous life. He didn't do anything evil. But the heavens sent him to a place like this. He had no family, no friends, and nothing familiar. Was it too much? After experiencing so many things, that thought had long since been annihilated without a trace. This was not a punishment but a gift. Many images appeared in his mind. In the end, there were still many people here who loved him and were worthy of his love. For example, this quiet woman in front of him. She was his wife, a small life that belonged to them and was about to descend into this world. Rui was perfect. Her appearance was unparalleled, and her martial arts skills were unparalleled. She was always so quiet and tranquil. She never had any temper tantrums. She would silently guard behind you and only appear when you needed her. She satisfied all the fantasies a man had about his other half. At this time she sat quietly on the bed and he washed her feet. After a while, they were able to sleep in each other's arms. Li Yi felt that his luck was really damn good. I Lu Rui, it should be from that night in Willow Leaf Village. The moment the vague figure standing outside the door said this, his good luck began. Lowering her head to look at his serious expression, her body gradually relaxed. She placed one hand on her lower abdomen and used the other to help him tame a strand of his hair. The corner of her mouth revealed a smile that could charm all living things. Thank you, my husband. Li Yi raised his head and said, just a word of thanks. It's not sincere. A pair of soft arms wrapped around his neck. While Li Yi was still in a daze, he felt a cold sensation on his lips. How about this? She rarely took the initiative. Her pretty face was like a blooming flower. Not long after, Li Yi sat by the stone table in the courtyard and looked at the ridiculously round moon in the sky. The night was long and he couldn't sleep. Chapter 752. Li Yi lay on the rocking chair. The servant girl placed 2 peeled eggs in front of his eyes and rolled them gently. Yesterday he only felt a little sleepy after sitting in the courtyard until late at night. Li Yi felt that it was time to consider the matter of Rui and sleeping in separate rooms. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to sleep in the future. Young master, are we going to move soon? The servant girl put down the eggs and moved her little hand on his head. Her voice was soft. Li Yi nodded. Yes, pack your things for the next 2 days. We'll be moving to the city soon. The servant girl nodded obediently. For her, as long as she could be with the young master and miss, it didn't matter where they moved. Creak. The door of Mississippi Lu's room opened. She walked out of the room. Xiao Huan looked down at the young master with dark circles under his eyes and then looked at her. She picked up the 2 boiled eggs and shook them. Second miss, do you want eggs? Yang Liuqing was probably the outsider that Mississippi Lu treated the most carefully. In fact, ever since she became Rui's disciple, Li Yi had never treated her as an outsider. She left without saying goodbye. Even he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, let alone Mississippi Lu. He still wanted to figure out the ins and outs of this matter. Yang Liuqing, the little disciple of your second miss? Emingzu ate the shrimp fried rice that Li Yi brought over and looked up at him. What about her? Help me check if there is anyone with the same name as her among the royal family or nobles of the Wu kingdom. Li Yi said and then opened his mouth. The arrogant Lolita put a peeled shrimp into his mouth. This was not the era of the developed internet in the future. It was easy to search for the needed information on the internet. It would be more troublesome for Li Yi to do this on his own. The royal family always had some special channels. Of course, these weren't things that Li Yi could easily come into contact with. Emingzu nodded and looked at the white-haired old woman beside her. Nanny, please make a trip. The old woman nodded and looked at Li Yi meaningfully. Then she turned and left. The arrogant Lolita peeled another shrimp for Li Yi. Then she hugged his arm and said coquettishly, Sir, can you take us out of the palace today? She was already 13 years old, almost 14 years old, and her body had begun to develop. Naturally, she had to pay more attention to her behavior. Concubine Yen had always been strict with her etiquette education, but when she saw Li Yi, she revealed her playful nature and no longer had any royal manners. Seeing that Li Yi was unmoved, she hurriedly winked at Yongning, who was chewing on the pork ribs. Although Yongning was young, she had always been Shanning's little follower. She could understand her meaning with one look. She put down the pork ribs and hugged Li Yi's other arm. She blinked her big watery eyes and looked at him pitifully. Who could resist these 2 pairs of extremely cute and innocent big eyes? Li Yi sighed slightly and nodded helplessly. Sir is the best. The Tsundra Lolita jumped up and kissed him on the cheek. When there were no outsiders around, she would return to this little girl's temperament. Yongning also came over. Her mouth was still stained with oil. She blushed and kissed the other side of Li Yi's face. Although she was much younger than the arrogant Lolita, she was quieter because of her experience and was far less playful. Yongning, hurry up. Let's go change. The arrogant Lolita pulled Yongning and ran out of the morning dew hall. A group of palace maids followed behind in a panic and shouted, Your Highness, slow down. Concubine Liang had passed away early. Yongning was still young and would be afraid to live alone in the palace. Li Yi suggested to the old emperor to let her live with the arrogant Lolita and be taught by concubine Yan. Although Shanning was playful, she still took good care of this little sister. Emingzi put down the bowl and looked at him. She asked, "Did you see father today?" "No." Li Yi shook his head. He came today mainly to ask her about Yangliuking. He also wanted to see Yongning and the arrogant Lolita. He did not see the old emperor. Emingzi suddenly looked at him and hid the trace of hope in her eyes. She asked, "Is there really no way to cure father's body?" In her heart, he was still the omnipotent Li Yi who could solve anything. Li Yi paused while peeling the prawns. The atmosphere became a little stifling. Even in the future, the old emperor's illness was incurable. He had tried his best to change it, but he could only slow down or slightly extend his life. He was not a god and there was nothing he could do. Li Yi sighed and said, "If I can move out of the palace and put aside all political affairs to recuperate, the situation might be much better." Although it was impossible to cure this illness completely, it would not kill him immediately. It was important to maintain a good mood. The palace was like a huge cage. It was too oppressive and lacked people. Even though most of the political affairs were handed over to the two prime ministers, the country was too big. As the emperor, there were too many things he had to deal with every day. When Li Yi talked to him, he would often ignore his identity as the emperor. Occasionally he would joke around as a form of adjustment. This was the tacit understanding they had developed over a long period of time. However, the effect was only temporary. If the old emperor could immediately put down the burden on his shoulders and find a quiet place outside the capital with beautiful mountains and rivers, he could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun when he had nothing to do. If he was in the mood, he could go to the brothels to play mahjong with Chong or find a few old ladies to dance in the square. He could not say that he would live to a ripe old age, but he could definitely live for a few more years. However, Li Yi could not mention this method, and neither could the imperial physician. Even they knew it very well. "Father, he is very tired." Emingzi lowered her head. Her face was a little gloomy, but then she raised her head and said seriously, "I will try to persuade father." Li Yi nodded. She was probably the only one who could raise such matters with the old emperor. There was a short silence between the two of them. Then the sound of footsteps approached from afar. The white-haired old woman came over with a thick stack of books in her arms. She put them on the table. "These are all the information about the Wu Kingdom." Emingzi looked at Li Yi and said, "Take these books back and read them slowly. Remember to return them when you are done. It won't take much effort to find someone." Li Yi shook his head. Since these books were not for the public, it was better to leave them here to avoid bringing her unnecessary trouble. He picked up a book and casually flipped through the pages. He was so fast that the old woman standing to the side could not see clearly. In the time it took to take 2 breaths, he picked up another book and repeated what he did just now. Emingzi had already seen his reading speed, so she was no longer surprised. "What are you doing?" The white-haired old woman looked at him with a face full of confusion. Li Yi casually replied, "Reading? You can memorize it like this?" The old woman was puzzled. At this speed, she could not even see the words on the pages clearly. "I'm just looking for something. There is no need to memorize it." Li Yi could not tell her that even the action of flipping the pages was unnecessary. As long as he touched these books, he would remember all the content in the book. Wouldn't he be regarded as a monster? The white-haired old woman looked at him as if she was looking at a monster. After he flipped through several books, the sound of flipping pages finally stopped. Li Yi's eyes stopped on a certain page. "Found it." He looked at some information recorded on it and his eyes slightly narrowed. Chapter 753. Have a look. Li Yi put a few pieces of paper on the table in front of Mississippi Lu. He had just copied them from the palace. Most of them were secrets of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, in this era where information was blocked, secrets for the people of the Jing Kingdom were not secrets in the Wu Kingdom. Several years ago, the current emperor of the Wu Kingdom, who was only the second prince at that time, killed his father and took the throne as he wished. After he took the throne, the first thing he did was, of course, to eliminate the remaining supporters who were loyal to the late emperor and would rather die than submit. Then he killed his elder brother, the eldest legitimate son of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom and Empress Wendy, who was also the crown prince of the Wu Kingdom at that time, with a cup of poisoned wine. This was a normal action. No emperor would leave alive a person who could threaten his position. And there was more than one person who could threaten him. The emperor of the Wu Kingdom and Empress Wendy had 2 sons and a daughter. As the eldest son, the former crown prince was killed. Princess Duanrong, who was only 14 years old, and the young prince disappeared without any news. Some people said that they were secretly executed by the emperor of the Wu kingdom after the usurpation. Some people also said that they were hidden by the ministers who were loyal to the late emperor, waiting for the day when they could set things right and help the young prince to regain the throne. Some people also said that they were imprisoned in the Deep Palace. In short, whether in the Wu kingdom or in other countries, there were many speculations about this matter. But obviously, none of the speculations was confirmed. From the information collected in the palace, Li Yi learned that the daughter of the emperor of the Wu kingdom and the queen was titled Princess Duanrong, and her name was Yang Liuqing. At that time, Li Yi finally understood what the unsmiling girl who was unbelievably strict with him was carrying on her back then. Did she want to go back to take revenge after learning martial arts? The possibility was so small that it was almost negligible. How could the security around the emperor of a country be weak? Even a grandmaster would not be able to easily sneak into the palace to commit regicide. Moreover, her strength was still a long way from that of a grandmaster. The possibility of her taking revenge on her own was too small. Of course, the current her was no longer the rash young girl from 2 years ago. She would definitely not do something like striking a rock with an egg. He had already asked the eldest princess to pay more attention to the whereabouts of that Princess Duanrong of the Wu kingdom. The Jing kingdom definitely had people who specialized in collecting such information in the Wu kingdom. I've already asked someone to keep an eye on her. Li Yi saw that Mississippi. Lu was silent, so he asked with concern, "Are you all right?" His disciple, who left without saying goodbye, was actually a princess of a country, and could be considered as half a princess of a subjugated country. Li Yi could not understand Mississippi Lu's feelings at the moment. Although she was usually strict on the surface, they were about the same age, and their temperaments were like carved from the same mold. The relationship between master and disciple in this era was far from what the future generations could understand. Mississippi Lu never did things without a beginning, so Li Yi was really worried that she would run away without a word one day. "It's okay." Mississippi Lu put away the pieces of paper, stood up and said, "I see. Are you really fine?" Li Yi looked at her. Why did she have to pull a long face? At this time he forgot that Mississippi Lu always had a straight face. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "What do you think will happen?" Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, "Just smile when it's okay. It's not good to always have a cold face. Boring?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him indifferently and walked straight in front of him. When she walked past Li Yi reached out and tugged at her cheeks. It was still the same bouncy face that he was familiar with. No matter what expression she put on, the corners of her lips still curled up. She stood there in a daze, as if she did not expect that he would dare to do such a bold thing in this place that was no longer the kingdom of Qi. "Damn it, why is the sunlight so dazzling recently? I can't see again." Fong closed his eyes and touched his hands randomly. He actually found the position of the door accurately, and his figure disappeared in an instant. Those people have even begun to imitate the style of our ready-made clothes now. They use inferior cloth, rough production, and the price is low. Our business has been affected, but they are backed by those big families and we can't afford to offend them. It's better not to cause more trouble. Tseng Zumo said a few words and looked at Li Yi sitting on the chair with an abnormal expression. She asked in confusion, "What's wrong with you?" "It's nothing. I'm a little tired sitting down. Let's talk on my stomach." Li Yi stood up with the help of the chair and lay on the small bed next to him. His butt was not touching the chair and he immediately felt much more comfortable. More importantly, there was a faint fragrance on the small bed, which reminded him of the not very warm hug that day. It was the same smell. When have we ever been afraid of trouble? After changing to a comfortable position, Li Yi looked at her and said, "It's just the Cui family. In this capital city, there is no one we can't offend except the emperor. Don't worry, the Cui family won't be able to jump around for long. Get up." Tseng Zumo forgot about the business at this time and walked over with a little blush. How could a woman's bed be casually slept by others? Although this was only a studio, she would usually rest here when she was tired from painting. She slept here more often than in her bed in her room. If others saw this, they might think of her. Of course, this others only referred to someone who would tease her because of this. Seeing that Tseng Zumo had already grabbed his arm and pulled him off the bed, Li Yi quickly said, "Isn't it just lying down for a while? Don't be so stingy." He couldn't sit down now. Yesterday he pinched Mississippi Lu's face, and she chased after him until his butt was swollen. He suspected that she was using him to vent her anger. She didn't touch anywhere and only kicked his butt. Although it wasn't hurt, it would at least hurt for a day or two. This grudge had been formed and he remembered it in his heart. In the future he would return it 10 times or even 100 times. Get off. Seeing him being so shameless, Zengzumo was a little angry. She couldn't help but think of the 2 times he saw her naked body, but she pretended that nothing had happened. He was also shameless. He even said to Cinny that he wanted to marry her, but now, in short, after being stimulated by him at this moment, the Luo Shui goddess had mixed feelings in her heart. There was an indescribable feeling. Naturally, she couldn't move Li Yi with her strength, so she simply took off her embroidered shoes, jumped onto the bed and wanted to push him off. In a moment of desperation, she pushed the wrong position, and one hand pressed on Li Yi's butt. Ouch! A sharp pain came. Li Yi's body straightened, and the expression on his face twitched. He grabbed Zengzumo's wrist and gritted his teeth. Don't touch there. Her wrist was grasped by a strong hand. After a moment of daze, Zengzumo's face quickly turned red. She seemed to have discovered something and asked, "Why?" Li Yi gritted his teeth. "I accidentally hurt myself yesterday." One of Zengzumo's hands was held by him. She looked at him, then looked down and suddenly pressed her other hand on his butt. At this moment she even forgot about the boundaries between men and women. She only thought that this shameless man had always bullied her, and now she finally had a chance to get back at him. Li Yi's eyes widened. The pain this time was even more intense than before. His hand loosened and she easily broke free. Seeing him like this, Zengzumo's pretty face revealed a hint of smugness. "You have this day too," she thought with such pleasure in her heart. "Are you going to get down or not?" She raised a hand and pretended to hit him. Li Yi's eyelids twitched. He subconsciously held her hand and turned over. However, he didn't expect that Zengzumo would be driven by this force and fall straight down, pressing on top of him. As a result, Li Yi's butt came into intimate contact with the bed, and because there was another person on top of him, it was even closer. At this moment he felt that he had come to hell. However, the next moment all the pain seemed to disappear, and he felt as if he had gone from hell to heaven in an instant. Her soft body pressed against his, but their lips didn't touch, but their faces were indeed close together. An even clearer fragrance came to his face. Li Yi could feel her breathing and heartbeat. When he opened his eyes he saw a pink and white jade neck. The reason why it was pink and white was because this skin was turning from white to pink. The whole world seemed to quiet down at this moment. At the door of the studio, the little servant girl with her hair combed into a bun put her thumb in her mouth and quietly moved a little to the side. Then she opened her eyes wide. Chapter 754. Li Yi was no longer unfamiliar with this delicate body on top of him. Although there were 2 beautiful accidents, they were only visual impacts. This kind of skin tightly pressed together, and he could feel her rapid heartbeat. It was far more exciting than a hug that was not exactly warm. With the soft body in his arms and so close to her, Li Yi's expression was a bit dazed. He seemed to instinctively hold her slender waist. Summer clothes were thin to begin with. She was wearing a thin dress at the moment. Even through the clothes she could still feel that kind of slippery feeling. Zengzumo had struggled to prop herself up. Her face was full of shame and anger, as if she would explode in the next moment. However, at a certain moment, a strange feeling came from her waist, causing her body to tremble slightly. She lowered her head and looked at him in disbelief. His expression was a bit dazed and his eyes were a bit unfocused. She saw a certain emotion in the depths of his eyes, which made her heart beat faster. Something seemed to melt in her heart. At this moment she was half propping herself up. Their bodies were no longer close together, but in reality, there was only an extremely small distance. This kind of distance was actually even more ambiguous. Li Yi only needed to shift his gaze slightly to see more scenery. However, he could not think about this at this moment. The dazed look in his eyes quickly dissipated, and he realized what situation he was in right now. He looked at her pretty face, which was inches away from him. Their breaths blew on each other's faces, and they just stared at each other in a daze. Li looked away. He was worried that he would not be able to recover from her almost natural seductive posture, and his hands quickly let go. Zengzumo saw a certain emotion fade from his eyes. Her body stiffened slightly, and her face was no longer blushing. A trace of pain and disappointment appeared in the depths of her eyes, and she struggled to climb up from his body. Li Yi only glanced at her tentatively. When he saw the light in her eyes fade, his heart almost uncontrollably tightened. Without any hesitation, his hand once again wrapped around her slender waist, and he exerted a little force. In the end, the goddess of Luo Shui didn't get up. She fell on his body even more heavily than before. This time, the two of them looked at each other's eyes and noses. They both saw the same thing in each other's eyes. They just stared at each other without saying a word. Only the sound of their heartbeats could be heard clearly in the quiet room. The servant girl, who had already put her thumbs in her mouth, finally seemed to realize something. She gently closed the door without making a sound. Then she pressed her ear against the door and held her breath. An excited expression appeared on her face. After a quarter of an hour, she still didn't hear any sound. Her feet were a little numb from standing. She held onto the door and pressed her ears even closer. The door was opened from the inside. Li Yi supported Xiao Chui's forehead to prevent her from falling. He stepped out of the room, pinched her face and said, "So young yet not learning good things." Watching him walk out, Xiao Chui rubbed her face. When she looked into the room, she saw the young miss coming down from the bed. Her clothes were neat and tidy, but her face was a little red. Other than that, there didn't seem to be anything strange. She grew up in a brothel and naturally knew much more than ordinary women. She knew that if something had happened between them just now, the young miss would definitely not be like this. She shook her head with some regret. These two really were strange people. Zheng Zimo walked out of the room. Her face was still flushed like a peach blossom. She sat at the stone table in the courtyard and stared in a certain direction. Although they didn't say anything or do anything just now, the two of them hugged each other and stared at each other for a long time. Some things were different from before. These things didn't need to be said. Zheng Shichen walked in from outside and even looked back suspiciously. He had met that person here several times, and with some rumors in the outside world, he was almost certain of that possibility. He wanted to say something about this matter, but with the relationship between the two of them at this time, he couldn't. He stood by the table and opened an exquisite paper package. He looked at Zheng Zimo and said with a smile, "Zimo, Fuji released a new product 2 days ago. The taste is not bad, try it." Zheng Zimo looked up at him. Although she didn't speak, she poured a cup of tea from the table and moved the teacup to the opposite side. The expression on Zheng Shichen's face froze. He looked at her as if he couldn't believe it. His hand holding the teacup trembled slightly. He slowly sat down, suppressed the surprise in his heart, and drank the cup of tea in one gulp. The tea was cold, but the warmth in his heart even surpassed that of the day he was promoted to Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, and countless envious gazes in the court. The slovenly old man sat in the carriage and glanced at Li Yi. He asked, "Go back?" Li Yi nodded. The slovenly old man looked at him suspiciously and asked, "Didn't you come to see the house today? Haven't you seen it yet? Didn't you take a detour because of the traffic jam?" The slovenly old man looked at him as if he didn't know whether he had seen it or not. Li Yi waved his hand and got into the carriage. "Then let's go see it." What was it that made him so happy that he even forgot the serious matter of this trip? The slovenly old man looked back in a certain direction, and his heart was full of doubts. The house had almost been arranged and they could move in tomorrow. Li Yi had just packed some things he needed. As for the daily necessities and the like, there were maids to take care of them. Life in the future would not be so boring. In the morning or afternoon he could accompany Rui to take a walk by the lake of the Mathematics Institute, or he could walk more and go shopping. It was not far from the Imperial Palace, and the proud Lolita and Yongning could come over every day. Rui liked children and she also liked them to play at home. Li Yi did not know what it would be like at home after they gave birth to their children. Mississippi Lu's mood seemed to have improved again. Li Yi felt that the beating was not in vain, but he still had to remember it. A gentleman's revenge was never too late. One day she would definitely regret it. Everything had been going well recently. It seemed that all his bad luck had been used up when he was kidnapped by the Taoist nun. He could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun peacefully. He did not have to think about anything, and he could not help but want to smile when he thought about it. The little maid's hands were soft, and it was comfortable wherever he pressed. Recently, the sunlight in this courtyard had been particularly dazzling, so when Fang came in, he had to be careful. He did not want to see something that he should not see, and he did not have to worry too much about the problem of loyalty and justice. "Young master, the Chui family is really going to hold a glass appreciation meeting. They invited a lot of people and it will be held in half a month." The Chui family must have invited a lot of people since they delayed the meeting so much, and it would not be limited to the capital. They were really making a big move. Others did not know how many pieces of glass the Chui family had accumulated, but Li Yi was very clear about what each piece of glass was. He knew it even better than the Chui family themselves. They dared to mess up their business. Although it was not a big impact, it was really disgusting. When it came to disgusting people, he had never been afraid of anyone. After thinking about it, he waved at Fong. Come here, there are some things that need to be arranged. Chapter 755. Although not everyone knew that the Cui family would hold a glass appreciation party in half a month, all the influential people in the capital received an invitation. Although the venue was not as high class as the Wang family's, it was said that the scale was much larger. The number of glasswares would be several times that of the Wang family's. It was strange that such a precious object as glass was rarely seen. Why did it suddenly increase these days? Many people were puzzled. The royal family once held a glass appreciation party, and there were many glass Buddha statues and wares on display. This was not strange. It was not strange for the royal family to take out any treasures. A few months ago, the Wang clan also held a glaze bazaar and took out even more glaze. This was not strange. The Wang clan was rich enough to rival a country, and they coincidentally met a foreign merchant, so they obtained so many glaze wares. It was nothing special. But why did the Cui family join in the fun this time? According to their bold words, it seemed that the glass they had accumulated was more than the Wang family took out at the last glass bazaar. Everything had a limit. The reason why glass was precious was because it was rare. Only a fool would spend so much money to buy a glass appreciation party that was held every few days. Of course, the number of glass on the market was far from overflowing. Even if the price was really reduced, the Cui family still made a lot of money this time. The Cui family was proud of their success, but the merchants in the same jewelry business in the capital were having a hard time. The wind of glass in the capital had been blowing for several months, and there was no sign of it stopping. The actions of these big families were getting bigger and bigger. If this continued, it would be difficult for them to do business. Everyone was scrambling for glass, but it was expensive. With their wealth and status, it was difficult to get it. Running a small business could not be compared to the Cui family's golden jade pavilion. They could only hope that the heavens would quickly take back the gift of glass and give them a way out. The shopkeeper of a jewelry shop in the capital was sitting in the shop and sighing. From morning until now, there was not a single customer in the shop. This business was really impossible. While he was lamenting in his heart, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. The shopkeeper jumped in fright. When he looked up, he saw a tall and sturdy man walking in from outside. "Sir, are you looking at jewelry? Are you giving it to someone or?" The shopkeeper hurriedly went up to greet him. This was the first customer of the day, so he had to treat him well. In a place like this, sometimes they wouldn't be able to open for business for a few months after completing a single business. "I don't look at jewelry." The man's voice rang out like a great bell. "I'm here to sell you something." Selling things? When the shopkeeper heard this, he immediately lost interest. He waved his hand and said, "We sell jewelry here, we don't buy things." The burly man took out a sparkling and translucent glass ball from his sleeve. The shopkeeper swallowed the second half of his words. His eyes widened and his breathing became hurried as he stared at him. "I have a batch of colored glaze to sell to you." The burly man looked at him and said, "Look at this color, this luster, this feeling. It's definitely a top-notch colored glass." The shopkeeper stared at the glass ball in his hand. Even his breathing stopped for a moment. If such an item was placed in his shop, it would undoubtedly become the treasure of the shop. He didn't know how many customers it would attract. He did not have the right to attend the colored glaze appraisal conference in the palace, nor did he receive an invitation to the Wang family's colored glaze bazaar. This time, no matter what price he had to pay, he would leave behind this glass ball. Seeing that the shopkeeper did not speak, the man thought that the shopkeeper did not believe him. Frowning, he suddenly raised his hand and threw the glass ball to the ground. After an extremely crisp sound, the burly man crouched down and pointed at the pile of fragments on the ground. "Look, these cracks, these fragments, they're not fake, right?" He picked up a piece and handed it to the shopkeeper. "If you don't believe me, feel it." The shopkeeper's lips trembled and his face had already turned purple. He pointed at the burly man and said in a trembling voice, You. The burly man patted his shoulder and said, Don't rush, don't rush. If you don't believe me, I'll let you throw one yourself. Bring it in." He waved his hand and two people outside the door carried in a large box. After opening it, the shopkeeper's gaze was completely attracted by the dazzling array of items in the box. The burly man looked at him and said with a smile, "How about it? Today we happen to be having an activity. Each item is 10 taels. 10 taels of silver, you won't lose out. 10 taels of silver, you won't be fooled. 10 taels of silver you can buy a piece of colored glaze. How about it? Are you tempted? Action is better than action. If you buy 10 pieces at once, you won't have to pay for the broken one. 10 taels of silver for one piece? The shopkeeper raised his head and looked at him, his eyes flashing. What, you think it's expensive? The burly man looked at him and said with a smile, if you buy more, the price can be negotiated. Chui Shi was the steward of the Chui family's Golden Jade Pavilion in the capital and the neighboring prefectures. Originally he was only an unimportant member of the Chui family, but soon he was no longer. If all these colored glaze were sold, the Chui family could make a huge profit from it. And this was all because of his foresight a few months ago. The last colored glaze charity sale of the Wang family did not satisfy everyone. Instead, it made the love of colored glaze popular in the capital. The colored glaze bought from the Wang family could be sold at a high price with a slight change of hands. And the Chui family hoarded the colored glaze from the foreign merchants. When the public's desire for the colored glaze reached its peak, they took the opportunity to sell it. Then they waited to count the silver. After this incident, he would definitely be valued by the family and become a core member of the family. It was unlikely that he would be able to develop in the imperial court in this lifetime. But if he was only in charge of the Chui family's business, it was very possible. The invitations had been sent out. Only 10 days later, the Chui family's colored glaze appraisal would begin. That moment would be the new peak of his life. Everything was ready except for the east wind. Chui Shi looked at a young man coming from afar and asked, Dongfeng, what's the matter? Why are you so flustered? Third uncle, it's over, it's over. Chui Dongfeng's face was pale and his voice was full of fear. What's the panic, what's the panic? Chui Shi looked at him discontentedly and said, what the hell happened? Is the sky falling down? Colored glaze, colored glaze. Chui Dongfeng gasped. What happened to the colored glaze? Chui Shi's face changed and asked, could it be that something happened to the Chui family's colored glaze? The word colored glaze was related to his future. Chui Shi's heart immediately tightened. The Chui family's colored glaze is fine. Hearing Chui Dongfeng's first sentence, Chui Shi's heart was relieved. As long as the colored glaze was fine, everything was fine. But there are colored glaze everywhere in the capital now. Chui Dongfeng's voice was still trembling. You can buy a piece of colored glaze with 10 taels of silver and get a piece of soap. If you buy clothes, you get a colored glaze hairpin. If you buy perfume, you get a colored glaze bracelet. The Drunken Moon Brothel. The chopsticks in the Drunken Moon Brothel have been replaced with colored glaze. Chui Shi's body softened and he grabbed Chui Dongfeng's arm. His eyes immediately became bloodshot and he asked in a trembling voice, You say it again. Chui Dongfeng's eyes were already full of despair. These days, a large amount of colored glaze suddenly appeared in the capital. Colored glaze is no longer valuable. When the Chui family was about to hold a colored glaze appreciation party and wait to make a big profit, the originally hard-to-buy colored glaze suddenly became a common thing on the street overnight. Who would spend a lot of money to buy the Chui family's colored glaze? But the problem was that the price paid by the Chui family for these colored glaze was too great. Chui Shi knelt on the ground, his vision turned black and there was only one thought in his mind. It's over. Not far away there was already a noisy sound of footsteps coming. Li Yi still overestimated the patience of the Chui family. In just half a year the price of colored glaze fell from the clouds to the ground. If it continued for a few more days, there would still be a big profit to be made. However, he also knew that this matter should end here. This kind of money could not be earned too much. If it continued, the fragile economic system of the Jing kingdom might be at risk of collapse. The old emperor would be angry with him. While thinking about these things, Wang Yong hurriedly walked in from the outside. As soon as he entered the door, he asked with a face full of joy, Brotherly, have you heard the Chui family? Li nodded, sighed and said, The Chui family, this time the Chui family, I'm afraid, will lose millions of taels of silver. Chapter 756. Of course, the Chui family was going to lose money. Their brains were damaged. Using a large amount of jewelry and silver to exchange for a bunch of worthless junk, if they didn't lose out, who would? However, everyone knew that this couldn't be blamed on the Chui family. After all, since ancient times, colored glass had been an extremely precious treasure. This was not only reflected in its value, but also its significance. Crystal clear and radiant, it was already very attractive. It was also a Buddhist treasure, symbolizing good fortune. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see it in their lifetime. Who would have thought that such a good treasure would become cabbages on the side of the road overnight? Previously it was worth 3,000 taels of silver, but now it could only be used as a token to buy clothes. Buy one and get two free. The difference was like heaven and earth. No matter how smart one was, they wouldn't have thought of it. No wonder the Chui family suffered a loss. The rarer something was, the more expensive it was. It was all because in such a short period of time, too much colored glass had appeared in the capital, and the price of colored glass was dropping by the day. The crystal was clear and colorful and it was beautiful, but that kind of crystal clear and colorful thing was everywhere in the capital, so who would want it? This time, the nobles in the capital were all dumbfounded. A few months ago they spent thousands of taels of silver to buy the colored glass wares. In the blink of an eye it was worthless. No one would feel good about this. This time they were screwed over by the Wang family. The monks were equally dumbfounded. Other people's colored glass wares were at most 1,000 taels of silver, but their colored Buddha statues were worth no less than 10,000 taels of silver. There were countless people who secretly complained about the royal family and the Wang family, but they didn't dare to show it on the surface. After all, among the two families either one was extremely powerful. Even the nobles couldn't afford to offend them. However, when they heard that the head of the Wang family smashed hundreds of colored glass wares in front of everyone, the complaints in their hearts lessened and turned into mockery and schadenfreude. The Wang family actually still had so many colored glass wares. They must be thinking of making a few more windfalls in the future. Otherwise, why would they hold the colored glass appreciation convention? Now that colored glass was worthless. Although they suffered a loss compared to the Wang family's loss, it was simply a drop in the bucket. People were always like this. When they were unlucky, they couldn't help but feel better when they knew that others were even more unlucky than them. Of course, it was not all a loss for them. The colored glaze that the royal family and the Wang family sold to them were all donations. Everyone was registered, and a large portion of it went to the national treasury. At least, it left a record with the emperor, which could prove that they had done their best for the country. The silver was not all for naught. The Chui family was different. According to the calculations of some people, the Chui family's loss this time was at least 4 million taels of silver. What kind of concept was 4 million taels of silver? It was almost a third of the Jing kingdom's annual tax revenue. No matter how deep the Chui clan's resources were, this number was still a heavy blow to them. It was so heavy that it hurt their bones and shook their foundation. Without many years of recuperation, it would be impossible for them to recover. At this moment, everyone understood what was going on. The Wang family, the Chui family, the big and small dignitaries in the capital, and even the royal family were all fooled by those foreign merchants. Ever since lioli became a common commodity, those foreign merchants disappeared without a trace. They suddenly appeared and then disappeared, taking away a large amount of silver. They completely ignored some people in the capital, and for a long time they could only tighten their belts and live their lives. Damn foreign merchants. So much so that this sentence became a classic that people in the capital often said. Where those foreign merchants went even after many years was still an unsolved mystery. I want a house to bring me here. We agreed that my house will be opposite yours. Yi Zichen said. I have to go back, bring Shaolian, to get married. Looking at the laughing figures in front of him, Li waved his hand and said, You can ask Mr. Lu for these things, he will arrange it for you. As long as they earned enough points, they would be able to exchange for what they needed. Be it silver, houses, or even pointers from top experts, they were all clearly marked. This was the rule of the Lu alliance. From the beginning, Li did not intend to tie them down with friendship or anything else. Tangible benefits were the strongest ties to maintain a relationship. Of course, everything would not be so unreasonable. Mississippi Lu didn't know these things, but Lu Luo knew how to win people's hearts. Before they left, Li reminded them worriedly, Remember, don't talk to people like this when you go out or you will be beaten to death. Remember to tell them. Now in the capital, foreign merchants were hated by everyone. If they were discovered, it would not be as simple as a beating. I'm sorry, I'm used to it. A man touched his head awkwardly and left with the others. They didn't need to report to Li about the matter of lioli, but these people were different. They were the ones in charge of contacting the Qi kingdom. The news of lioli's worthless value would soon reach the Qi kingdom, and they needed to go there to make some arrangements. Young master, isn't it too much to earn so much money? Fang scratched his head and couldn't force out a complete sentence. 2 years ago he was still risking his life for a few copper coins. How long had it been? The amount of money he had passed through was already in the millions. When he thought about it, there was always a feeling of unease in his heart. It is a little too much. Li nodded. Although this method of earning money was fast, it seemed to be similar to cheating and swindling people. If one cheated too many people, they would suffer retribution. However, the old emperor was personally involved in this matter. Without his approval, there wouldn't be a Lioli Bazaar. Even if there was retribution, the reputation of the royal family and the Wang family was much greater than that of the Li family. The soup is ready. I'll go take a look. Li walked towards the kitchen and waved at him. Go ahead. When you pass by Willow Lane, help me get some osmanthus cakes. They were now in the new residence in the capital. This place was not far from the School of Mathematics and the Imperial Palace. The environment was quiet and secluded, and it was some distance away from the noisy market. There was a slope behind the house. The slope was not steep, but standing at the top of the slope, one could overlook the surrounding scenery. The most eye-catching thing was the artificial lake of the School of Mathematics and Mathematics. At dusk, it would feel good to hold Rui's hand and take a walk there. What he had to do every day was to wake up early. Before the morning market dispersed, he would cross a few streets to buy some fresh vegetables. Sometimes, he would carry a fresh fish and stop at Willow Lane to rest for a while. When the sun rose to 45 degrees Celsius, he would return home to prepare dinner. He didn't need to do any of the procedures. At most, a maidservant would help him pick the vegetables and light the fire. At this time, Yongning would bring a small stool and sit down to watch. The Tsundra Lolita wanted to help but was always a nuisance. This kind of life was good enough. Li scooped a bowl of soup and tasted it. The taste wasn't too strong. He decided to let it boil for a while longer. He only drank a mouthful of soup, but he didn't want to waste it. He placed it on the stone table outside and walked to the back to call Xiao Huan to drink it. The soup was for Rui to keep her body healthy, but it was also good for ordinary women. It could beautify their skin, enhance their breasts, and stimulate their breasts. Little maidservants should drink more of it. This was the secret recipe of the old monk Tanin. It was said that it was for keeping her body healthy. Li found a similar recipe in a book, but it had a few more effects. Xiao Huan couldn't be found. She might have gone somewhere with the Tsundra Lolita. When Li returned, he saw someone sitting at the stone table. The bowl of soup had already been emptied. This soup tastes good. It took a long time. It's good for the body. Li looked at the middle-aged man sitting there and smiled. Drink more if you like it. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.